I think male loneliness specifically is higher nowadays, at least if you ask how people feel.
Yeah.
I regret to inform you, the men are not okay.
I can't keep a consistent source of social relationships going, and
there is also a huge male loneliness epidemic. It's actually really,
that's because women are unmarriable.
People say they're lonelier. Now, I don't know what that means. Does that mean they're just unhappier?
The male loneliness epidemic is self-inflicted to a large degree.
I do think that most men are toxic, and I do think that they fit the criteria and modernity of what abuse is. And I think that women love that.
That phase where you slowly start hating your girlfriend is crazy.
I remember this one time on a weekend she said she was coming. Yo, I cried.
Yeah.
Bust your bubble, ladies. You need us.
Excuse me?
You do.
That's
you
great.
do.
My advice, love. I'm gonna wear something a bit more feminine than that. Do
Sorry?
yourself any favors there.
Because I'm not going to be talked to like this.
Like what? Yeah. What?
Real men.
A real
don't
man? You're
talk
going to tell me what a
women
real
like
man
this.
is?
Well, Andrew.
My dad.
Real women don't abort their children, lady.
Boys will be boys. Boys tend to be reckless. They tend to punch each other and wrestle each other.
They could have more real life friends. They could have more real life dates if they changed some things about the way they behave.
And men and boys are taught that somehow innately they are toxic just by virtue of having been born as men.
Women are attracted to presence, not your neediness. Face fear and discomfort head on, and it's a path to growth. Modern society tames men, but you are meant for adventure. God designed men to be warriors, not bystanders.
I never hear anyone ever talk about the female epidemic of loneliness, because in a patriarchal society, the problems of women and children are ignored, while the problems of our men are highlighted.
Now, this might come as a shock to you, but not everything has to do with women. Sometimes we can talk about other things. Sometimes those other things are not women.
How's a woman gonna understand the loneliness of men when she can post a thirst trap picture on Instagram and literally have like 100 dudes DM her?
We're sick and tired of hearing about toxic masculinity when we are drowning in toxic femininity.
Tell me what you think toxic femininity
Accusing
is.
men of things that never happen and
Yeah.
calling it sexual
Like
assault. Like Brett Kavanaugh.
Our notions of masculinity aren't too traditional. On the contrary, they aren't nearly traditional enough. The solution isn't that we sit around and talk about our feelings. It's that we do a whole lot less of that sort of thing and get back to being men again.
Men are lonelier than ever, or so we're told. The campaign to end loneliness defines loneliness as a subjective, unwelcome feeling of lack or loss of companionship. It happens when there is a mismatch between the quantity and quality of the social relationships that we have and those that we want. They also go on to point out that there are different types of loneliness: emotional, social, existential. It can be situational, transient, or chronic. It's also important to point out that there is a huge and very important distinction between being lonely and just being alone. Being alone can be fulfilling to some people and does not mean that a person will feel lonely. Similarly, a person may not be physically alone, but may still experience loneliness if the quality of their relationships is not enough for them. According to the Campaign to End Loneliness, in 2022, 49.63% of adults, that's nearly 26 million people in the UK, reported feeling lonely occasionally, sometimes, often, or always. And there has been an increase in the number of people experiencing chronic loneliness, rising from 6% in 2020 to 7.1% of people in 2022. And that, again, is in the UK. Meanwhile, a study at Harvard Graduate School of Education and the Making Caring Common project found that in America, 21% of people reported feeling serious loneliness, with 67% of those reporting that they did not feel they were part of a meaningful group. A lot of people online seem especially concerned with male loneliness as opposed to, female or women's loneliness. And they often cite an article from 2021 from the Survey Center on American Life, which reports that 15% of men today have no close friendships at all, as opposed to 10% of women. To look at this study in a little bit more detail, 34% of men report having only 1 to 3 close friendships, but 15% of them have 10 or more close friends. In comparison, 39% of women report having 1 to 3 close friendships, but only 11% reported having 10 or more. So when you actually look at it in comparison, the numbers aren't that drastically different between genders. But of course, we have to remember that the number of close friends you have doesn't directly correlate to how lonely a person is. You can have a lot of friends and still feel lonely. You can have a few friends and still feel fulfilled. It very much depends on the individual. However, the article does go on to suggest that the more close friends a person has, the less likely they were to report feelings of loneliness. However, when you get down to 3 or less close friends, all those people were equally as likely to feel as lonely as each other. And that goes for both men and women. This group consisted of 49% of men and 49% of women, with half of those groups reporting that they felt loneliness and isolation at least once in the last 7 days. So, looking at the actual stats and the information presented to us, I have to admit I'm struggling to see how loneliness is a purely male or man's problem, or something that affects men considerably more than women. That said, it clearly is affecting men. There are lonely men out there, just as there are lonely women. But one thing that I think is different that I found while researching this video is the ways in which loneliness affects men. That's very different between men and women. The consequences of loneliness for them are different. The reasons for the loneliness are different. And if they're even aware at all that they're lonely is different. There's an interesting study from Dr. John Ratcliffe at King's College London who found amongst people over the age of 50 in the UK, men were far less likely to view themselves as lonely or use the lonely label than women. However, when asked other questions such as how often do you feel lack of companionship, how often do you feel isolated from others, and how often do you feel left out, which are indicative of loneliness but don't use the word lonely, he found that they were reporting similar or ever so slightly lower levels of loneliness than women. So men were near enough just as lonely as women, but were less likely to label it as lonely. To quote the study, 74.8% of men said they were rarely or never lonely, compared to just 65% of women. Furthermore, 35% of women were sometimes or often lonely. Conversely, just 25.2% of men were sometimes or often lonely. But in questions about loneliness in the past week, 14% of women had felt lonely and 10% of men. Though women appeared lonelier, men displayed worse social relationships. 1.4% of men were severely socially isolated, disregarding partners and spouses, compared to 0.5% of women, and 2.3% of men had no close relationships, discarding partners and spouses, compared to 0.8% of women. Women also averaged more close relationships, 7.77 compared to 7.11, and a better view of their friendships. This study also found that the men who were lonely were more likely than women to engage in self-destructive behaviours, such as overconsumption of alcohol as just one example. In fact, the most common example. This is so revealing, and again, while it's important to remember that this particular study was just done on people over 50 in the UK, it is very telling and fits the pattern that we see elsewhere for other demographics in other areas. For example, a report published in January 2025 found that, and I quote, "A new Pew Research Center survey finds that compared with women, men don't report that they feel lonely more often or have fewer close friends. However, men do seem to turn to their networks less often for social connection and emotional support." It goes on to say men and women are about equally likely to say they have at least one close friend, and most do, but men who have close friends don't communicate with them as often as women do. So I don't think it's as simple as just saying there's a male loneliness epidemic because men are in general more lonely than women, or men have it harder than women, or let's pity men and not women. I think it's just that men respond to loneliness in a different way and have different reasons for their loneliness, and are also less proactive in seeking help and support when they are feeling lonely. And that's something that I want to unpack in this video, and we're going to split it up into 5 parts. They're big chunky parts, so if you want to come back and watch this in parts, that's absolutely fine, but let's jump into it. I'm going to be looking at 1, why are people in general so much lonelier now than they apparently were in the past? Part 2 is why are men specifically today so lonely? Part 3 is going to be the consequences of male loneliness if we just leave it be and don't do anything about it. Part 4 is about finding friends and how men and women go about it differently. And part 5 is just a short one that is specifically focused on men's relationships with women in terms of romantic and sexual relationships. Before we go any further, let's get a little bit of admin out of the way. Kyra may be snoring in the background, I'm so sorry. You know what it's like having an elderly dog. She sleeps a lot these days. She's a little snuffly and grumbly, and this is her house, and it's a small flat, and the noises just echo around. So I do what I can with like noise reduction when I'm editing these videos, but I can never completely get rid of it, and I'm sorry about that. Right, the boring stuff. And I kind of hate saying this stuff, and I'm sorry, but YouTube's latest algorithm change has been really damn hard on my channel, and my videos are simply not being seen by as many people as they once were. I've had a bunch of comments and messages from you guys saying that my videos just not being recommended to you. If you want to watch my channel, you're having to like literally search it up by name. Some people aren't getting the notifications that they used to, and honestly, like, it's causing problems. My views are way down, my revenue is nothing, and I'm struggling a little bit. So if you would like to help at all, I would really, really appreciate it if you just kind of keep watching my videos when you can, clicking on them when you see them. If you would feel comfortable sharing this or any of your favourite videos on social media with your family and friends, that can really, really help. Of course, liking the video, even disliking the video, leaving a comment is really, really damn helpful. Or you can go over and follow me on Instagram, where I usually post on my stories about new videos that I have made. So if you follow me there, you'll pretty much always get the latest videos, hopefully shown to you if you watch my story. Plus, I like when people follow me on Instagram, especially when you guys tag me and, like, you know, post about, like, when you're watching one of my videos, if you make fan art. I love that stuff. Like, it gives me the warm fuzzies, like, and I appreciate it so much. Thank you. Like I say, financially has been a massive struggle as well, with ad revenue being, God, absolutely nothing compared to what it was, and I absolutely hate mentioning this stuff, but if you would like to help support my channel and help me keep making videos, then I do have channel memberships where you can get a few extra videos that are just like little art videos and poetry videos and stuff like that, and you also get some cute little emojis that you can use in chats and comments and little stickers next to your username, which is really damn cute. You also get like priority when I do like video premieres, or if I do any live streams, which I'm thinking of starting up again. I've been terrified for a long time, but I do miss it, so we'll see how that goes. And I also have Patreon, which you can join for as little as $1 a month, and that gets you, like, you know, there's some extra notes on there, there's some behind the scenes photos and cool stuff and art projects I'm working on, and at the higher tiers you get exclusive stickers and art and photography prints sent out to you every couple of months, which is really fun, and I love it, and they're all stuff that I've made myself. Promise I'm nearly done with this. Alternatively, my latest book, Outside, is available, and that is a massive collection of photography, art, poetry, and short essays about identity, creativity, and nature, and the connection between them all. It is available as an ebook and as a chunky hardback book, which also comes with a code, so you can download a free version of the audiobook from my website. And my first poetry collection, Reflections on Healing, is a much shorter little collection of poetry and a couple of photos, and that is available as both a paperback and an ebook, and that is available on all Amazons I could make it available on around the world. Okay, I hate saying that stuff, but thank you for listening. I have one more disclaimer before we get into the actual meat of the video. Thank you for your patience here. But this is about, like, the actual content, and I just want to, like, preface the video with this. Charlie Kirk is included in several parts of this video. Video clips of him, critiques of his ideas. I think he's even in the thumbnail, which I made a couple of weeks ago. And like I say, that's because I made the thumbnail, I downloaded the clips for this video. I started my research on it maybe 3.5 weeks ago, a long time before he died. So I was in two minds about still including him in this at all, but honestly, this is what he wanted his legacy to be. Him spewing hate and misinformation is the life that he chose for himself, and that is how he will and should be remembered. I don't obviously agree with how he died. I am never going to be in support of gun violence or killing people you disagree with. That's just an absolute massive no, of course. I'll never sit here and celebrate a person's death. But I also don't think we should try and rewrite history and pretend he was some good man just because he's dead. He was not a good man. Charlie Kirk, like many of the other people whose clips I've included in this video, lived a life spewing hateful rhetoric, bullying people less fortunate and more vulnerable than him. He was full of hate and ignorance and willingly spread so much misinformation, and I don't think we can or should pretend otherwise. This is the legacy he wanted to leave, and I think this is how we should remember him. And so for that reason, I've chosen to keep him in my video and keep my content as it was planned to be in the first place. I don't think I should make changes just because he's dead. He, to his last breath, stood by these hateful things that he says, and I'm not going to pretend that he didn't, you know? Okay, let's get into the actual video now. Okay, so part 1, why are people today so lonely? Of course, we've already established that people today are lonelier than even just a few years ago, and definitely lonelier than they were in the 90s, but why is this? Let's start by looking at the issues which don't affect a specific gender, but all people in general. One of the biggest indicators for loneliness amongst all age groups, genders, and races has been shown time and time again to be poverty. The less money a person has, the lonelier they feel. And the simple reason for this is that they literally cannot afford to go out and participate in activities, start new hobbies, travel to new places, or they're simply too busy working. This was found and discussed in books like Young and Lonely, The Social Conditions of Loneliness by Janet Petzlia and James Duggan. Sorry if I'm struggling to pronounce stuff. I'm actually having a hard time reading off my notes because my eyes are not what they used to be and I need another eye test. Also, if you want to check out all the books and articles and everything I've referenced, they're all linked in a source document in the video description, all listed in order of how they appear in this video. There you go. So in particular, this affects the youngest and oldest people in a population because they either have no control over their finances for themselves, or they have no other means of socializing either because they don't work, for example. So without the money to do social activities, they feel really lonely. And this is particularly worrying because researchers like Dr. Aaron Davis and his team found that there is a link between poverty, loneliness, and increased health problems. So to summarize his studies very briefly, there is, of course, a correlation between increased poverty and increased health problems. There's also a correlation between increased loneliness and increased health problems. However, what Dr. Davis and his team found is that those who are both in poverty and feeling lonely are more likely to suffer severe health problems related to pain, fatigue, and low mood, rather than those who were just lonely or just in poverty. Even amongst those who felt equally as lonely as each other, there were considerably fewer symptoms and health problems seen in those with a higher income rather than lower. Does that make sense? Poverty makes you lonely and unhealthy. Lonely makes you unhealthy. Poverty and loneliness is greater than the sum of its parts for health problems, to summarize. But it's not just poverty that can cause loneliness, of course. Aging can also be a contributing factor. So comedian Max Dickens wrote a book about male loneliness in 2022 while on his search for a best man for his wedding. I reference this book quite a lot in this video. It's one I definitely recommend, so remember it. We're going to keep coming back to it. While researching the phenomenon of loneliness, he found that both men and women's social networks peak in their mid to late 20s before falling away. He calls this decline network shrinkage, as people lose more friends, drift apart, and stop making as many new ones as they get older. He discusses how this happens to both genders, but the decline itself seems far steeper for men. So he writes that while men on average have bigger social networks than women in their mid-20s, by the time they hit 40, this pattern reverses. So basically, both men and women have increasingly smaller social circles, but the decline is just way steeper for men. And take a look at the study we mentioned earlier by John Ratcliffe showing the decline in friendships and increase in loneliness in people over 50. It says the same thing. But just because there's a correlation between aging and loneliness, that doesn't explain the cause, does it? That just says, oh, it could be a factor, it's part of it, but it doesn't really explain why. Why do we get this network shrinkage? So what other possible causes are there? Let's have a little look. Janet Batsleer and James Duggan also list the rise of disconnected small towns. Meanwhile, Bill Howard in The Cure for Loneliness, How to Feel Connected and Escape Isolation, writes that more people are choosing to live alone as they move to urban areas for work and education. Similarly, Robert Putnam in his book Bowling Alone, The Collapse and Revival of American Community, and Amy Lutkin in her book The Lonely Hunter, How Our Search for Love is Broken, both discuss how, to quote Amy, loneliness is on the rise because people don't invest in social clubs, instead going home after work to bask in the glow of TV and phone screens. Who on earth has enough time or money to commit to another activity outside the home? This is a sentiment that was again backed up and summarised very nicely by Max Dickens when he said, "We've withdrawn from many of our traditional sources of social connections. We're busier than ever before. A decent segment of the population are working longer hours. We're also spending more of the spare time we do have wolfing down mass media, especially TV. On top of this, we're much more geographically mobile. The theory goes that when you know you'll move on again soon, you're less inclined to invest in social ties." So, to summarise all of that, we're more lonely than ever because we're living alone more, we're living further apart from each other, we don't have enough time or money to socialise, we're consuming way more traditional and social media rather than going out and interacting with people face to face and actually chatting with them and getting to know them, and we're reluctant to forge new connections with people who may move away soon or we may move away soon. Some of these factors are out of our individual control, sure. We often can't help how much money we have or how much we have to work. And in those cases, it might help to suggest a solution that is more on a macro scale that helps people in general. You know, for example, suggesting more government investment and support, making sure every person actually is making a living wage, helping people get out of poverty, investing more in creating social resources for the community that are free and accessible to everyone. That's not something an individual can just fix themselves, but it's something we need to be looking at on a societal level to help people. But what about the rest? What about the micro stuff that we can influence on an individual level? Why are people choosing to watch TV alone rather than go to the pub and have a chat? Why are people more willing to sit around and scroll Instagram than, visit an art gallery with a friend? Why are we so reluctant to make new friends in general? These are questions that I don't necessarily have the answers to, but I feel like if this is something that is affecting you and you recognise yourself in that, it's worth asking, why do I feel this way? And do I want to change it? And if so, how? And it's not just that we have less connections than ever in terms of number, it's that the connections we do have are not as deep or strong as was once the norm. So it's not just the quantity of connections, but the quality of them too. Bill Howard reminds us that all humans have a genetic need to be socially connected, and we benefit from all types of social connection. So this might look different for every single one of you, and how many or few connections you need or want is going to be different for each individual. But what's clear is that for many of us, whatever those needs are not actually being met. Bill goes on to write that authentic connections are grounded in mutual respect where both parties benefit. It's these types of relationships, when built into our personal and professional lives, that provide a feeling of social connection. The more authentic connections we have, the less likely we'll experience gaps in social connections. Having just one authentic connection can mean the difference between happiness and loneliness. And this is something I want you to try and remember as we go forward with this video, and especially into the next section. The value arises from genuine, authentic, deep connection with other people, not just in surface level interactions or getting attention. That's something I'm going to keep coming back to. There is a reason that study after study shows that while social networking can help some lonely people forge connections, this can only help when it's being used to facilitate authentic connections. For the majority of people, it's no replacement for real-life friendship, and there is no world in which something like getting likes on social media or having strangers randomly message you like creepy things is going to alleviate loneliness. A lot of people I've seen talking about loneliness online seem to completely misunderstand this. Attention and connection are not the same thing. In the same way that alone and lonely are not the same thing, a person can be alone but not lonely, a person can be receiving a lot of attention but still feel incredibly lonely because they're not getting that authentic connection. Let's look at a few video clips as an example. So here's a video I found online of a young man talking about how lonely he feels in his life and how he believes a relationship with a woman will be the only solution to that. I think we're going to be looking at this video in a little bit more detail, or at least some of the clips from it, later in the video. So don't worry too much about this main young man for now. I just want to give you the context for this whole video, because the bit that I want you to focus on for this is there is a little man in the corner responding to him, reacting to him, and trying to give him some life advice. I think he sees himself as a little bit of like a self-help guru. He's like, ooh, I'm going to teach men how to be men. This man basically gives him groundbreaking advice like shave your mustache and go for a run at one point as a way to alleviate loneliness. Interesting. And he actually says this about men and women and loneliness.
So of course that's true. They can never understand. A woman would. How's a woman going to understand the loneliness of men when she can post a thirst trap picture on Instagram and literally have like 100 dudes DM her? Open up a Tinder, post a few pictures. Shitty, doesn't even have to try, doesn't have to write a bio, doesn't have to do anything. Effortless, a few pictures with her boobs squished together, thousands of matches within the day. Yes, that's their power.
And this is what I have a problem with, and he's not the only person who thinks this way.
And the loneliest person is a single man, not a single woman. Because again, if that single woman tomorrow decides, I want a man's attention, she can do a few things to make it happen ASAP. I don't care who she is. That man does not have those same avenues.
And you saying they not getting no action, Jackson?
None.
Wow.
And I think this is really, really telling, isn't it? And I think this may be a little bit indicative of why so many, perhaps men in particular, seem to be lonely, because they don't understand the difference between attention and connection. So many people, maybe these men in particular as well, seem to be simply chasing attention when what they need is connection, but they're going after the wrong thing and therefore they'll never be fulfilled. And that's why they keep staying lonely. The thing is, and this is entirely anecdotal, so maybe there are some women who misunderstand this as well, but it's mostly just men I see misunderstanding this. So let's take another clip as an example.
Say, well, women aren't desirous of casual sex, but like when it comes to loneliness, I mean, we can make an argument that like men are the ones who are encountering like genuine loneliness to the point that they don't even get a drop of attention from women. They can't even get a date. They can't get a text back. They can't get anything. Whereas a woman, she could be overweight, unattractive, and could get laid. We had a girl on the show, I'm not trying to be mean to her, unremarkable woman, right? She was overweight, and she was saying, yeah, I was fucking like 6 dudes a day.
Those are, okay.
But her male looks equivalent, like overweight, not attractive, that guy is struggling to even get a text back.
Let's, I don't want to ignore it, but let's try and put aside the body shaming and misogyny here, as disgusting as it is. Because mostly I want to concentrate on what all these men here are implying. They claim that women cannot possibly be lonely because they either receive creepy, often harassing messages from strangers on social media, which sexualize and objectify them often without their consent, or they can easily have meaningless sex with people who don't want a relationship with them and only want to use them as a temporary sex toy, and therefore women can't possibly ever be lonely, because if they're getting attention, that means they can't feel lonely? Now, I'm not saying there aren't women out there who aren't fulfilled by these things. Maybe they enjoy the messages from strangers. Maybe there are women who, get fulfillment and connection out of casual sex. That's not an issue. That can absolutely happen. And if those women are deciding that's how they want their connection and everything, that's absolutely fine for them. Let them do it. All good. However, in general, these men are giving examples of women receiving unwanted attention or very superficial attention and assuming that this must stop her feeling lonely, when again it doesn't, because it's not authentic connection. Creepy DMs from strangers don't form connections. They don't stop feelings of loneliness. They don't fill social needs. Often they just make you feel gross or creeped out. And if it is what you're looking for, if you do want that little bit of attention, it might give you a little dopamine boost, a little temporary whoop, that's nice. But they're nothing, because it's still not an authentic, deep connection based on mutual respect where both parties benefit. Remember that definition we had earlier? That's important, that matters. It's the same with things like dating apps. They can be useful because they can be a precursor to future authentic connection, but in itself, they don't really help, because even if you get attention on there, that's not real connection. As a single woman, I do currently have a dating profile, and I have quite a lot of likes on there, like a few, close to 10,000, but they're likes, they're not matches, and that's the difference. They're not mutual. There's no connection, there's no respect, it's not authentic. It's just this person looking at me on a very, very surface level and saying, why not? And that's not something that alleviates loneliness. These are people who have seen the very tip of my very surface level of appearance and maybe a couple of prompts on there and thought, yeah, why not? And when you hear about so many men talking about how they use dating apps and they just swipe, 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 you realise that a like on a dating app is quite meaningless from them, you know? It's not flattering, because often it's not personal. Chances are 90% of them don't even remember swiping on you on your profile, so it doesn't mean anything. They're not really actively making a big authentic choice. They're just saying, well, she's not terrible, might as well, you know? Now, I'm not saying every man uses dating apps like that, but it does seem to be the majority from what I've seen people talk about online and the people that I've interacted with. So yes, it's kind of like getting attention, but it's the wrong kind of attention and it doesn't mean anything. Romantic relationships are built on shared values, similar goals, chemistry, shared interests, and again, mutual respect. That's the big thing. They're what you need to form an authentic, genuine, deep connection with someone. And as a 32-year-old child-free woman who says all of that in her profile, I'm never going to have a genuine, deep, authentic connection with Bob, the reform voter who's in his 60s, 3 times divorced with 7 kids, you know? And if he sends me a like, that's not going to make me feel anything good, because it just says to me he clearly didn't read my profile, he doesn't respect my boundaries, and if anything, that makes me feel less valued and more alone, because attention doesn't alleviate loneliness. Attention is not connection. I'm going to keep saying it. The idea that you can alleviate loneliness by playing a numbers game of getting X amount of meaningless, shallow likes or attention instead of working on genuine connection with someone is frustrating. And in my mind, it does explain why so many people are lonely, because they're focusing on the wrong things. And it kind of feels to me like people are trying to gamify connection and friendship and relationships. And that's something I want you to remember, because we are going to be talking about that a little bit later in this video, I think in part 4, because it's something I've noticed and it's something I have a little bit of a, I have questions about it. Let's just say that. But for now, let's move on to part 2. Why are men today so lonely? So while we discussed in the introduction to this video that the gap between the numbers of men and women who are lonely isn't as big as some people think it is, I do believe, based on my research I've done for this video, that men face different kinds of problem relating to loneliness than women do. For one thing, I believe the rise in toxic masculinity makes it harder for men to open up to other men, to form deep connections with them, and forge real, authentic relationships and friendships. I believe subtle homophobia also plays a huge part in this, because certain men don't want to open up to others in case they're seen as gay, apparently. I believe early socialization is to blame, as is the toxic influence of certain manosphere creators and influencers, as we're going to be seeing some clips of in this section and going forward in this video. For another, I believe men are more reluctant than women to take a proactive approach in tackling their loneliness or even identifying their own loneliness. And this is again related to issues with toxic masculinity, but just how this plays out is going to be something I'm going to be discussing in more detail in part 4 of this video. Before that though, if you listen to certain men online, you may be led to believe one of 2 things. 1, men are only lonely because they're now weak and too emotional, unlike men in the past who were all stoic and independent and therefore never lonely.
If a cowboy mentality and too much macho stoicism is what is driving the epidemic of lost and lonely men, then why is the problem getting worse over time? Everyone agrees it's worse now than ever before. I just went through some of the many statistics that prove that. This is a major problem. Yes, men are in bad shape. But if that's all getting worse, then how can we blame traditional notions of masculinity? Would anyone argue that the cultural belief that men should be self-reliant and hide their emotions is more pervasive today than it was half a century ago? Of course not. So again, if that's the cause of the problem, why is the problem worse today?
Men are socialized to believe strength, dominance, and stoicism are behaviors of a real man. Is it any surprise that men are lonely and have less friends nowadays? You have to be vulnerable to make friends. Don't tell me there aren't systemic problems affecting men. Now, while a lot of this may be true, men have been socialized this way for centuries, and this is all relatively a new phenomena. Toxic masculinity has existed forever. If anything, there's less toxic masculinity nowadays. The cultural embrace of like gender nonconformity, femboys, Harry Styles in a dress, Barbie movie, blah 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 blah. My point is, toxic masculinity did not just appear in the mid-2010s.
Or two, men are only lonely because damn women are no longer to be doormats, and how dare we? Grumble, grumble, let's blame women.
This is why men are leaving, because women are on board with each other despite logic and science. It's all about women, 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 women. It doesn't have to make sense. It doesn't have to have any logic. It's women overall. And women who feel like that are not making it better for other women coming up. Because men want to be with women, despite what it looks like, despite all the statistics. We do love you. We do want to be with you. But if you have this mentality, it's going to make men remove themselves from you in all areas. And I hate to bust your bubble, ladies. You need us.
Excuse me?
You do need us.
There is a male loneliness epidemic that's going on, but that is not.
With females.
Yeah,
women over.
But men are violent when they're incels.
Yes.
I think both of these ideas are absolute nonsense, and we're going to be discussing the role of women, I think, in the last part of this video. But for now, I want to focus on that first point. In summary, there are a lot of creators out there who I don't agree with, Matt Walsh and Shoe on Head just being two of them, who believe that traditional masculinity has always encouraged men to hide their feelings, not express them to anyone, not value male friendships, and be as independent as you can at all times. Therefore, they believe that when we say, hey, these aspects of masculinity are a little toxic and may be harming you and causing you to not focus on forming deep, meaningful friendships, this might be why you're lonely. They think we're just wrong because stoicism and emotional repression have always been the norm, and so that could never be harmful, right? Let's talk about the myth of it's always been this way. The idea that it's always been the norm for men to be socially isolated, stoic, unable to express their emotions, or not allowed to express their emotions, and that it can't possibly have had any negative effects on men because loneliness has only been an issue for the last 15 years or so, is not only blatantly false, but anyone who claims this has never studied the basics of history and is completely unaware of cultures other than cis-white American man. Let's take a look at the Matt Walsh clip in a little more detail to really understand what he's saying. So he opens by quoting a news article which suggests that so many of the pressures on men to be masculine have certain traits are making it harder on them, but he immediately rejects this idea because men have always been lone cowboys and it never did them any harm before. Ooh.
What we find is that in that system, in that structure, men are constantly in competition with each other and constantly driven by this sense of anxiety. So that's the real problem. Too much competition, too much stoicism, too much, men are too combative and aggressive, and we got to calm all that down. Well, the problem with this theory is obvious, or it should be. Okay? If a cowboy mentality and too much macho stoicism is what is driving the epidemic of lost and lonely men, then why is the problem getting worse over time? Everyone agrees it's worse now than ever before. I just went through some of the many statistics that prove that. This is a major problem. Yes, men are in bad shape. But if that's all getting worse, then how can we blame traditional notions of masculinity? And again, it certainly was more common, back in the day, 50 years ago, or at any other time in human history. Indeed, historically, the push for a man to be strong and dominant and unemotional was much more pronounced than it is today. In fact, historically, if a man didn't exhibit those traits, then he would die and his whole family would die. It's only in recent times that it's even been a feasible option for men to be feminine and soft and in touch with their feelings.
So to summarize, Matt believes men have only expressed their emotions openly in the last couple of years. 50 years ago, and for millennia before this, men never expressed their feelings because they were not allowed. What are you talking about, Matt? This is blatantly false, but let's hear the rest of what he has to say before I dive into a little history lesson.
The post's overall thesis can probably be best summarized in this sentence from the article, quote, American men's isolation stems in large part from a pervasive cultural belief, experts say, that men should be self-reliant and hide their emotions, especially from other men. The absurdity of the premise could not be any more clear. Would anyone argue that the cultural belief that men should be self-reliant and hide their emotions is more pervasive today than it was half a century ago? Of course not. So again, if that's the cause of the problem, why is the problem worse today?
Actually, I would argue this. I would argue that in many cultures, especially amongst black men, it is more common for men today to feel they need to hide their feelings from each other than they did, say, 50, 60, 70 years ago. I'll go into more detail about that in a second when we look a little into the history of barbershops. But for now, I would also argue that for the average middle-class white man in a country like America, for example, or England or whatever, yeah, maybe it's easy for some men to be open about their feelings today than it was 50 years ago. But it's not necessarily easier than it was 150 years ago, 200 years ago, 1,000 years ago. The idea that men need to be stoic and repressed, contrary to what Matt Walsh says and contrary to what Siobhan Head says, is a relatively new phenomenon in the history of humanity. A lot of what the manosphere creators today say are characteristics of traditional masculinity are not actually that traditional and were not that common throughout most periods of history. Like I say, these straight-up factually inaccurate statements were repeated by Siobhan Head in her video, which amassed 4.9 million views. That's 4.9 million people who saw her spread blatant misinformation just because she can't be bothered to do any research beyond reading some tweets and making assumptions based on headlines from dodgy websites like the Daily Mail. So for full context of this clip, she mocks people who say men should feel free to open up about their emotions. Then she says, oh no, wait, no, that is a problem, but I don't want to speak about it like this because, I don't want to come across as a woke liberal. Oh no, wait, let's mock it again by quoting the Daily Mail headlines, which literally calls people woke. And then she moves on to mocking a man who says there are systemic problems which discourage men from opening up. Then she brings up the misinformation, saying that men have been suppressing their emotions for, and I quote, centuries. Not at all true. And her conclusion is that there's always been this form of masculinity and that some of us label as toxic, and therefore it can't be to blame for the increase in loneliness, which she claims only arose in the mid-2010s.
They're giving the 200 IQ answer that nobody has ever heard before. Just show your emotions, bro. And I'm not dismissing this problem, okay? I've made videos talking about this. Oh, you're crying at your grandfather's funeral? Okay, faggot. And studies have shown that men are scared to be vulnerable, even around the homies. And can you blame them when the media says stupid like this? Fellas, is it woke to open up to your fellow men and discuss history? Men are socialized to believe strength, dominance, and stoicism are behaviors of a real man. Is it any surprise that men are lonely and have less friends nowadays? You have to be vulnerable to make friends. Don't tell me there aren't systemic problems affecting men. Now, while a lot of this may be true, men have been socialized this way for centuries, and this is all relatively a new phenomenon. Toxic masculinity has existed forever. If anything, there's less toxic masculinity nowadays. The cultural embrace of like gender nonconformity, femboys, Harry Styles in a dress, Barbie movie, blah 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 blah. My point is, toxic masculinity did not just appear in the mid-2010s.
So have men been self-isolating and repressing their emotions for centuries? Well, the short answer is no. The longer answer is no, and here's what actually happened. I love these little history lessons with you guys. I need a name for them. History with Rachel just doesn't quite have a nice ring to it, does it? But for now, history with Rachel. So, Brett and Kate McKay wrote an article for the website The Art of Manliness back in 2008 titled The History and Nature of Man Friendships, which is a great little introduction to the topic. Very easy to read, very short and simple. It's nice. To summarise, for the last 2,500 years, men have been encouraged to have deep and meaningful emotional connections with other men. To quote a couple of segments of their article, in ancient times, men viewed man friendships as the most fulfilling relationship a person could have. Friendships were seen as more noble than marital love. Platonic friendships, according to Aristotle, were the ideal. So this Aristotle was a man writing in 300 and something BC about why a relationship of emotional connection without sexual intimacy with another man was the most perfect thing that all men needed. The little blog post goes on to say, during this period of time, the idea of heroic friendship developed. The heroic friendship was a friendship between two men that was that was intense on an emotional and intellectual level. And they list many examples of heroic friendships from epic literature at the time, mythology, and even religious stories, which taught the men at the time the importance of strong emotional bonds with other men. Moving forward in time, and this was still absolutely the norm for the next few centuries, all the way up to the 1600s. An example from this time is written about by Tiffany Watt-Smith in her article for The Atlantic, How the Passionate Male Friendship Died. She gives the example of Sir John Finch and Sir Thomas Baines, who she describes as Renaissance-era doctors who travelled, worked, and lived together in the 1600s and were buried side by side at Christ's College in Cambridge. Their tombstone and monument literally reads, beautiful and unbroken marriage of souls and companionship undivided during 36 complete years. They who while living had mingled their interest, fortunes, counsels, nay rather souls, might in the same manner in death at last mingle their sacred ashes. And for once, this is not a they were roommates situation, as happened to a lot of lesbian couples at the time. This was genuinely a celebration of deep, loving male friendship. As Tiffany writes, in their time across Europe, passionate bonds between men were publicly celebrated, and women were typically viewed as lacking the emotional depth required for true friendship. Misogyny and stereotypes aside, the fact is that for centuries, men were socialized and encouraged to have these deep emotional bonds and express their emotions honestly and openly, at least towards other men, not towards women. It's actually crazy to think how much our feelings on this have essentially reversed over time. French philosopher Michel de Montaigne wrote an essay titled On Friendship in, I think, 1580-ish or 1585, something around the 1580s, in which he said that women's brains were simply not capable of understanding the depth, complexity, and longing of a real friendship like men could. Our brains were, according to Tiffany's summary of his article, colder and weaker than men's. And so looking at this, it's so interesting that so many of these manosphere creators stay no, men are traditionally cold and stoic and women are over emotional and you're just no. Back in the 1500s or 1600s, they didn't think this. They thought the exact opposite. Moving forward again in time, and Liz Plank writes in her book, For the Love of Men, A New Vision for Mindful Masculinity. If you look through the 19th century photos of men, you'll notice right away that male friendship has undergone a massive transformation. It used to be so common for men to seek a photographer's services to capture them holding hands, sitting on each other's laps, and being physically intimate. Again, she clarifies that this was in no way about romantic connection, for the majority of them anyway. Obviously some were, but instead she says it reflected the comfort they had with emotional intimacy in their everyday interactions. Other common examples can be seen by looking at, former US presidents, for example. So according to Liz's research, Abraham Lincoln famously and yet platonically slept in the same bed as his best friend Joshua Speed, and Theodore Roosevelt was known for using affectionate language in his letters to other men. Meanwhile, the Mackays wrote about Daniel Webster, a state senator in 1845, who would, and I quote, often begin his letters to male friends with "my lovely boy" and ended them with "very affectionately yours." Jeffrey Grief in his book Buddy System, Understanding Male Friendships, quotes Alexander Hamilton, writing in 1779, I wish, my dear Lawrence, it might be in my power, by action rather than words, to convince you that I love you. Did these sound like stoic, lonely cowboys to you? Because I don't think so. And as I say, it wasn't just common amongst Western or white men either. Male friendships have been valued throughout history and throughout numerous cultures and countries. It's no surprise to me that certain content creators, Matt Walsh, seem to forget that black men exist. But for the longest time, barbershops throughout Africa, particularly West Africa, especially in countries like Nigeria, for example, have been a hub of community and friendship, bringing men together, allowing them these safe spaces to open up and talk and express their emotions, and if they have worries, tell stories to each other, and that still continues today. It's a beautiful thing. Photographer Andrew Esabo has spent years photographing barbershops around all of West Africa, and he told the New York Times, "The barbershop is an intimate space where people come to discuss what they cannot speak about in their homes or in public. It's one of the few spaces where people from different walks of life, from different classes, mix." James Estrin, who interviewed him for the 2013 article, said, "While barbers may start off as strangers, they don't remain strangers for long. Often, they become long-term confidants with whom men share intimate details of their lives. The conversations may begin with sports, cars, or politics, but they often end with personal revelations that customers would share with few others." And it's not just in Africa either. Barbershops have historically been a safe place for black men in America too, especially during the civil rights movement, where they were described as more than spots for grooming services. They'd become cultural meccas, gathering places, and community hubs, according to a blog post titled "Barbershops in Black Communities, a Celebration of Black History Month." The author of this blog goes on to write that at all points in time, black barbershops were a place for the black community to gather, share ideas, discuss societal reform, plan strategy, promote unity, and find camaraderie during the times they needed it the most. There's actually a great book about this by Quincy T. Mills called "Cutting Along the Color Line, Black Barbers and Barbershops in America." And in his book, he wrote that African Americans needed spaces where they could not only get a haircut, but also gather in public without the usual surveillance from white people. The racial and gender privacy of the space enabled a level of truth-telling where black men could critically discuss racial politics. These barbershops absolutely played a huge, huge role in the civil rights movement by allowing these men a safe space to gather together and discuss their rights without judgment, but also facilitated these deep, authentic friendships amongst these men and created a sense of community. This was common well into the 1950s, despite what Matt Walsh and Shoe on Head seemed to think about all men being non-emotive loners during that time. A lot of them still continue to function as community hubs today too. Perhaps their popularity or the community aspect has dwindled a bit in certain areas of America, but not in West Africa. They're still huge in West Africa. And there is still absolutely a need for these safe spaces to facilitate friendship amongst black men. So there's your little history lesson. Male friendship has always been a big, beautiful, encouraged thing. So what changed? Because it's clear that today men don't feel comfortable with male friendships being this intimate anymore. And also, when did it change? We know it's not always been this way, despite what Matt and June seem to think, or rather what they maybe want you to think. But instead, it's been a gradual change over a few decades, basically. It also turns out that over the course of the 19th century, attitudes and beliefs about women were changing too. So as Tiffany writes for The Atlantic of the Victorian era, "The consummate woman was supposed to be tender, loving, and eternally supportive. Devoted friendships were seen as proof of her compassionate nature. Girlhood bonds were considered practiced for the affection and sacrifice necessary for future roles as wives and mothers." And of course, this is also tied together and rooted in misogyny, right? Women were cold and emotionless when men could suppress them in that way, and then they had to be nurturing and loving when men were like, "Oh wait, crap, we need them to take care of the children and tell them they need to be good mothers," you know? Basically, men didn't want to have to take care of the kids, so they had to say women were more suited to that, and what skills were needed? Compassion and love and tenderness, and oh no, maybe I can no longer express those things to my male friends anymore in case they think I'm gonna do that as a parent, and blah 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 blah. Like, yeah, suddenly it's not manly to have those skills anymore, and they're only women's skills, and you get the idea. And let's not forget the homophobia part too. Despite homosexuality being incredibly common amongst many ancient civilizations, over the years, as Christianity gained more popularity and power, people also became more obsessed with sexual purity, and in many countries like America, that meant shaming and shunning homosexuality. And so, of course, especially towards the end of the 19th century, and very slowly throughout the 20th century up until now, men didn't want to be mistaken for gay, so they had to drastically cut back on the affections that they showed other men, just in case it was mistaken for romantic affection, because we wouldn't want to risk that, would we? And finally, while this isn't an exhaustive list of every cause, I think it's important to mention the role that industrialization and the rise in capitalism has in all of this. As time went on, men more than ever were taught to be in competition with each other. Competition for who could have the best job, the most money, and so on. There was no longer any room for emotions and affections towards your competition, was there? So it was a long, gradual process of social norms and gender roles and societal expectations changing and basically reversing. And it happened at a different rate for different people of different classes and in different places and different races and so on. But it's very clear to me that this is not just a matter of men have always been emotionally stunted and it never did them any harm. I think, in fact, when men started to become emotionally stunted is when we saw an increase in loneliness, but it's happened so slowly and gradually over time, we're only just beginning to notice it. Of course, we can't also deny the role that, technology and the economy have in all this, but I don't think we can ignore the role of so-called traditional masculinity either, which is in fact anything but traditional. People like Siobhan Head and June, she made a whole video saying like, oh no, it's not masculinity that's doing this, it's not our expectations of men, it's just the rise of the internet, and it's just the economy. And I'm like, no. It can be both. In fact, it is both. She spent a whole video mocking people who basically want to encourage positive masculinity, right? Like, she spent the whole video doing that and being like, oh, we can't just judge men for being men. They've always been this. I'm like, you're wrong. You're wrong. So I said it a lot, but what is toxic masculinity? Let's talk about masculinity in general and what it means, right? So when we talk about masculinity, we're referring to a set of characteristics and behaviors which we usually associate with men and boys. This is a social construct defined by the members of a society, which can and has absolutely changed depending on time, place, and or culture. We've already seen that what people like Matt Walsh and June refer to as traditional masculinity is not in fact traditional at all. It's just what's become the norm of the last 100 years or so. Masculinity in itself is neither good nor bad, helpful nor harmful. It merely is. It's just masculinity. However, it's becoming clear that just as with femininity, there are some aspects of it which do harm people, some expectations that men face that can cause them to harm themselves or others. Often we refer to these particular aspects as toxic masculinity, but it's clear to me that, again, people don't really understand what this term means. Take a look at some of these clips.
So, well, my main qualm with this toxic masculinity thing is, why do we have to needlessly gender toxicity? Can't there just be toxic people? I don't think toxicity knows a gender. Women can be toxic, men can be toxic. It just seems...
But is it being rooted like, oh, okay, you're a man, so therefore you have to do this, this, and you have to do this, this, and this, therefore you can't do this, this, and this. And same thing goes for women. But when it comes to a man, I feel like toxic masculinity most often leads to violence against women.
Well, we've gone through the toxic masculinity. Young men are told that they're fascist and terrible just because they lift weights and they want to be a man in American society.
You brought up toxic masculinity. I believe toxic masculinity exists, but it exists inside of radicalized feminists, right? Where they're thinking that they should be able to own and control society because they're marching in the street with pussy hats and saying that they demand justice for a free and fair election.
I think a lot of times it's used in a way where it's almost demonizing all masculinity, and a lot of men interpret it that way. And men and boys are taught that somehow innately they are toxic just by virtue of having been born as men. And I don't think it's a particularly productive or helpful term. I think it's really divisive. I think we ought to just address toxic behavior.
I don't like this trend where we're trying to turn men, and you call it this. Masculinity is masculinity. I like masculinity. Masculinity is actually the one thing that saved me in life. Today, that archetype of what a man is being taught that there's something wrong with it, that there's something that's implicitly violent about being a man, and that's wrong.
So all of these people are wrong. They're either ignorant, like the guy from the Whatever podcast, whose name I can never remember, or people like Charlie Kirk and Candace Owens, I think they're purposely strawmanning to try and discredit their opponents, but none of them are really representing what we actually mean when we talk about toxic masculinity, and I think it's important that we define these terms properly. Toxic masculinity generally refers to specific aspects of masculinity which are harmful to people, whether it's the individual because of the roles they're forced into against their will, or other people who have to deal with the consequences of their actions based on them trying to fulfill a certain gender role. I'll reiterate, this does not mean all aspects of masculinity are toxic or harmful. It also does not mean that masculinity is inherently bad. And to address this specific misunderstanding by the whatever host, he's got it backwards. We're not assigning gender to toxicity, but we're describing certain gender expectations as toxic. He is getting the adjective and noun the wrong way round. It's a misunderstanding of the very basics of English language. So if I say that my dog Kyra is a good girl, I'm not gendering the concept of good. I'm saying that she, as a girl, is good. Girl is the noun, good is the adjective. Masculinity is the noun, toxic is the adjective. Toxic masculinity does not refer to toxic behaviour that is done by men. It refers to parts of masculinity, that social construct, that are toxic to men. It's different. So examples of toxic masculinity might be this idea that in order to be a real man, you have to be stoic and suppress all your emotions, other than anger. That is a part of toxic masculinity. That is because it is toxic, because it leads to men being miserable, being unable to process or express their emotions, and this often leads to violent or aggressive outbursts of emotion, anger, and so on that will harm others. Toxic parts of femininity, if you want the alternative, might be that in order to be seen as a real woman, you need to be submissive at all times and never be outspoken in your opinion. This is a toxic part of femininity because it leads women to be easily bullied, manipulated, and oppressed. It doesn't allow women to speak up for themselves or have their needs met, and this can harm them. And while we're on the topic of toxic femininity, I do believe it's a label which could be used in some circumstances like the above, but it's repeatedly misused by conservatives to push an agenda as a way to say feminism bad and undermine the seriousness of issues facing both men and women. Take a look at these examples from Charlie Kirk.
We're sick and tired of hearing about toxic masculinity when we are drowning in toxic femininity. When we become a feelings-based culture, you can't say that, you can't do that, well, you're going to offend somebody.
Boys will be boys. Boys tend to be reckless. They tend to punch each other and wrestle each other. That's a healthy, necessary part of the child development process. Trying to demonize that in the parental guidelines that Gillette was trying to have in a 30-second to a minute ad is toxic feminism, attacking toxic masculinity.
Can do anything wrong? Like, would you have been okay if there was like a Schick razor commercial like about toxic femininity? Would that have been okay with you?
Tell me what you think toxic femininity
Accusing
is.
men of things that never happen and
Yeah.
calling it sexual
Like what?
assault. Like Brett Kavanaugh.
He is an awful man and a rapist.
Wait, he's a what? He's an honorable
awful man. An
Hon-
awful
honorable?
man. I said awful.
Prove it.
What?
Yeah, facts. Name one fact of anything awful he's ever done.
He raped someone.
Because she said so?
Yeah, show me
wait,
some
hold on.
evidence.
Because she said so?
That wasn't even a trial in a court. It was in front of a
So why isn't there a trial in the court? Why didn't she go file it?
Why didn't she file a police report?
Because
She
there
can't
was no
remember the
evidence.
Date, time, place, no witnesses.
For young ladies, there is this toxicity that is infected. Because everyone says toxic masculinity, there is toxic feminism within the ranks of the dating pool, and it is toxic. Which is, you do not have to be a man. You don't have to present yourself as a man. Embrace your femininity. Allow the man to open the door for you. Allow him to pay for the first check. In fact, even more than that, you should expect that. And young ladies, I'll just be very honest though, that the bitterness that so many young women espouse towards young men, that's the reason why a lot of young women cannot find partners.
He's using toxic femininity in a very different way to how feminists use toxic masculinity. While we talk about toxic masculinity in terms of these traits of masculinity that are harmful, Charlie Kirk uses toxic femininity to say, these are women I hate, and I'm going to call them toxic. Another example comes from Andrew Wilson, who completely misunderstands the term and makes bizarre claims that an example of toxic masculinity is playing shooty video games.
All the things that you would consider toxically masculine. Here's another one, right? Video games, where, you roll through the town and you just kill everything that you see. Women don't give a shit about that either. When you're talking about toxic masculine traits, it seems to only be the idea of you are using your masculinity as a weapon to defeat some absurdity that I have over here.
He does realize that people of all genders play computer games, right? It's not just men, and it's absolutely not inherently toxic. Now, if a person experiences extreme anger and aggression while playing games, that could be a toxic behavior. If there are men who degrade and bully women playing games with them, that could be an example of toxic behavior. This links to toxic masculinity because, maybe these ideas that, men need to be aggressive, men need to put down women, men need to bully others, men need to speak over others. They are aspects of toxic masculinity that could come into the world of gaming, but that doesn't mean that gaming is an example of toxic masculinity. Does that make sense? The simple act of playing games, even shooting ones, is not toxic, and it's not an example of toxic masculinity at all. I also don't think Andrew has ever actually played a game in his life, because the example he gives, the ones where you walk down the street and just kill anyone, I play a lot of games, and I can't think of a single game that fits that. Like, even with, shooting games and stuff like that, usually there's a story, there's a purpose. If you have to shoot into a crowd, it's usually there's zombies attacking you or something like that. Or it's like a war simulator, like the Battlefield games, or, I don't know, even looking at the Battlefield games, the war there is message is harmful and destructive and terrible, right? I don't know, he might be thinking of games like GTA, where technically, yeah, you can shoot whoever you want and beat people up in the street, but even within that world, there's in-game consequences. You're chased by the police, put in prison, given fines, it disrupts the gameplay. That's not the goal of the game. So these actions aren't celebrated, so I really don't know what he's referring to. Anyway, sorry, that's a tangent. In further examples from the Whatever podcast, the men go on to make claims like this.
I think a lot of times it's used in a way where it's almost demonizing all masculinity, and a lot of men interpret it that way, and men and boys are taught that somehow innately they are toxic just by virtue of having been born as men. And I don't think it's a particularly productive or helpful term. I think it's really divisive.
But again, I have to disagree. Discussing toxic masculinity is not a critique of men as a whole, but it's simply about highlighting issues which affect men and other people. If I say, oh, the cause of this problem is that this person has cancer, that's not a critique of that person or something that they should be ashamed of. It's saying, oh damn, we know what the problem is, now we can address it. Same with toxic masculinity. It's saying the cause of this problem are these toxic beliefs you have about masculinity. Now we've identified them, we can work on changing our unfair expectations of men. We can work on reframing how you think things about yourself and other men. We can get these men to think about who they really want to be, not just who they've been forced to be. We can find a solution. Not a critique of men, it's pointing out the problems that they're facing, or the cause of the problems that they're facing. When men remain in denial, it just causes more problems. Take a look at this line from an often quoted article on happiness.com titled Male Loneliness, the Ticking Time Bomb That's Killing Men. The author writes, "We all know the stereotype of lonely old spinsters, women living alone that go days without talking to anyone except their 27 cats. But I was a youngish male. Wasn't it only old women and not men that get lonely?" The unwillingness to accept that this is an issue that happens to men, the needless gendering of the issue, the misogyny towards women, calling them old spinsters with cats, the fear that somehow admitting loneliness will in some way make you more feminine and less masculine. These are all influenced by toxic masculinity and all show an unwillingness to address the problem that just makes issues like loneliness worse. The key is identifying the problem so we can find a healthy solution. It's absolutely not about critiquing or shaming anybody as an individual or anybody for simply being a man. And this is why I think it's so important to talk about the opposite, the concept of positive masculinity as a solution to toxic masculinity. This is actually something that I've been speaking with a lot of my friends with over the last few months, to be honest. And I think one of the first times it came up was when I was speaking to a musician friend of mine at one of his shows. And I think you guys know, so I love sea shanties, I love folk music, I'm really nerdy about that kind of thing. And I went to go see the Longest Johns back when I was playing at Glastonbury in 2022. They were amazing. Took photos of them, got to know their bass player through that. He was like, are you coming to our Leeds show when we're playing? I was like, yeah, sure. Went along. That night met the rest of the band, got very drunk with them. We had a good sing-along until we got kicked out of Broodnell. It was great. And that's how I ended up getting to know JD, who is one of my favourite people in the world. He's a really, really damn good friend. I love him to bits. And we bonded over painting Warhammer minis and all that sort of thing. And I was at one of their Sheffield shows the other month. We were playing some pool, and this exact topic came up about toxic and positive masculinity. And I was saying to him how I actually really respect how he is such a role model of positive masculinity for his son. And I think that's something that is really, really lovely to see. And since then, the phrase has come up in quite a lot of my conversations and things. And as I was saying to JD, I think the Longest Johns in general are a pretty great example of positive masculinity that you can see, because let's not forget the history of sea shanties in general. These were songs sung by working class men, usually in unpleasant conditions, men who had repetitive tasks and long working hours, and there was definitely a sense of camaraderie amongst these men. And so in these kinds of difficult working environments, these strong, solid friendships between men would have been incredibly important. And that's a really beautiful aspect of positive masculinity, isn't it? This camaraderie and friendship and bonding over difficult times. However, at the same time, due to the nature of some of the work and the kinds of people doing these jobs, they were definitely not the I'm writing a letter to tell you I love you kind of men, but a little bit more like they were drinking a lot, maybe being a little violent, maybe not quite so open with their emotions kinds of men. So maybe that was a little bit more of the toxic masculinity side of things coming out. And yet JD and the guys and the band that is all men, I think it would be so easy for them to get swept up in the history of these songs and the environments that they were forged in, and feel like they also have to be woo, manly, ooh, sexualizing women, ooh, outward displays of aggression, but they don't. They actively choose not to. Instead, they fostered the really positive aspects of their masculinity, their hard work, the creativity, the kindness and empathy, the resilience, and they fostered an environment where people feel genuinely safe. You go to their shows, and with the exception of one woman who said some really misogynistic things to me, you know that they put together a crew of really amazing people, and they've cultivated a fan base that is so full of and welcoming to and accepting of absolutely everyone, women, queer people, people with disabilities. It's a really open, safe and welcoming place to be, and I absolutely love that. And that is purely down to what these men value and what they put out into the world and the environment that they themselves have chosen to create. And this to me is an example of what really beautiful positive masculinity is and is all about. Men like Andrew Wilson and Charlie Kirk and Andrew Tate and Matt Walsh and so on, they always go on about the importance of men are strong, men are protectors, blah, 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 blah. And yet for some reason their definition of protecting means outbursts of uncontrolled anger and bullying minorities or those more vulnerable than them. That's not protecting them, that's not strength, that's just cruelty. Whereas JD and the guys portray real strength and a sense of protection by dedicating their entire life to creating safe spaces where some of the most vulnerable people in society can come together and have fun and enjoy music together and have a little sing, have a little dance, and just be thoroughly accepted. That is what strength and protection is, not violent outbursts of ooh, I hate these women, And I think this is something that's so important to talk about, because we talk a lot about toxic masculinity and what it is and examples of it and why it's bad, but I think it's important as well to show examples of positive masculinity and have these role models like certain bands like JD and the Longest Johns, I'm friends with the guys from Stornoway, and again I think someone like Brian and Ollie and I don't quite know John as well as the others, but again, I see them as like really positive examples of masculinity in that they're open with their emotions and they can be vulnerable at times, but they're so kind and caring and hardworking and creative. And again, I see that as aspects of positive masculinity, and I think that's beautiful. I think it's something that we need to look at more and speak out about more and encourage other people to internalize as well. Words, I've gone off script here, I'm just ranting at this point, sorry. But basically, positive change and growth can't come about unless we acknowledge that there are problems there to be fixed in the first place. It's not just a matter of all masculinity good or all masculinity bad. There are positive and negative aspects to it, and it's important that we identify each of those and encourage and discourage certain ones. It's interesting here. So in his book, Billy No Mates, Max Dickens writes that the thought that I might be toxically masculine had never crossed my mind before. I'd heard the phrase, obviously. I knew it had been blamed for everything from rape culture to manspreading. If a man did something awful, if something awful happened to a man, or if something awful happened full stop, toxic masculinity seems to be the go-to explanation. But in my mind, toxic masculinity referred to other men. Monsters like Harvey Weinstein, sociopathic tech bros, and the sort of UKIP election candidates that look like they privately refer to chicken as gay beef. That term didn't apply to me. However, he goes on to say, if I'm being totally honest, I didn't think about being a man any more than I thought about having legs. I suppose that's what they call male privilege. Never before in my lucky male life had I been confronted with a gender difference that didn't fall in my favour. If I was part of an epidemic of male loneliness, then surely I needed to understand the role of the word man in that equation. Could masculinity, whatever that meant, really be to blame for my lack of friends? And so this was the first step to him understanding himself, his life, and making changes that allowed him to make new friends. The first step was admitting that he had this problem, that he'd internalized some of these negative and toxic aspects of masculinity, and that these weren't a failing of his, they weren't something that he'd necessarily done wrong, but they were aspects of his life and personality that he needed to identify and address in order to change. So how does toxic masculinity cause loneliness? Let's take a look at some specific examples. So as part of researching this video, I decided to do a quick search on social media about what makes a man strong, to see what kind of messages are being taught to and internalized by young men and boys today. And the results were, I want to say shocking, but at this point, nothing like this shocks me. They were disappointing, I think. A lot of them didn't necessarily seem bad on the surface. The types of men saying, you know, to just use and dump women, blah, blah, they were in the minority. Like, the overt misogyny was in the minority. That's fantastic. But instead, a lot of the messages seemed like they could be quite helpful on the surface. But maybe that was just the generic motivational music playing under all these clips.
Most men today are lost. They're weak, confused. If you want to be strong, read these 3 books. Number 1, The Way of the Superior Man. Women are attracted to presence, not your neediness. Face fear and discomfort head on, and it's a path to growth. Modern society tames men, but you are meant for adventure. You need a battle to fight, a beauty to pursue, and a purpose to live for. Comfort is the enemy, and you want to seek challenges. God designed men to be warriors, not bystanders. Number 3, Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. This is a Stoic playbook for inner strength. Control what you can, accept what you can't, discipline over emotions, and don't let them rule you out.
Because my brain is far too advanced. I'm too smart to read. I'm not gonna sit there and go, smart people read. No, I need action. I need constant chaos in my life to feel content. I need to be driving a supercar and fighting a bunch of hoes and champagne and going crazy. I can't just sit there, oh, and the pirate on the boat. It's for people with slow brain.
Tough times create strong men. Strong men create easy times. Easy times create weak men, and weak men create tough times. The cycle just repeats itself. So, he goes to me, look, don't ever forget the importance of raising warriors.
A strong man isn't just muscle and confidence. It's control, discipline, and the will to rise no matter how heavy life gets. Stays calm in chaos and keeps moving forward even when his heart is tight. He is not driven by ego, but by purpose. He doesn't talk about strength, he lives it. Quiet, focused, unshakable.
Absolutely everything as a man is your responsibility. It's your responsibility to become your best and brightest version of yourself. And you're not going to do that simply by talking it into existence. You need to live it into existence. You need to go out there and do things which are genuinely difficult, genuinely stressful, which are genuinely scary, so you can become the man you want to be.
What I found that was kind of most concerning was how subtle a lot of the harm in these messages was. There was a lot of content focused on telling men that in order to be a real man, you had to be disciplined, focused, hardworking, stoic, confident, which aren't necessarily bad traits in and of themselves, or in the right contexts. But what was interesting to me was what was missing in all of this. Where are the motivational videos about how to be a real man? You need to be kind, emotionally mature, able to communicate and regulate your emotions, have compassion, be responsible for the well-being of yourself and others around you. Where's that content? Well, thankfully it did exist in a few places, but it was far less common, received far less views, and was harder to find.
Real strength for men is not being stoic, is not holding your emotions in and not letting the world see you be vulnerable. Because I find like it's easy to be angry. It's easy to be quiet. It's easy to just shut off from the world. That's not real strength because it's easy. Real strength as a man is opening up to people, being vulnerable, being okay with feeling inadequate. Because let's face it, as men, you naturally want to be a provider. You naturally want to be considered an alpha. I tell my younger brother this. I hope he gets this. It took me way too long to realize this. The things that are actually hard, the opening up, the being able to convey that, hey, like I don't feel the best version of myself. That takes a stronger man to do than any of this other like bullshit about, oh, I don't feel nothing, I'm good all the time. Like that's nonsense. That's not real strength.
These types of content creators pushing positive masculinity were sadly in the minority. The majority of the videos were pretty awful. Here's an example from Andrew Tate, who seems to think that if men allow themselves to feel emotions, then they'll all be out there raping and murdering people. Because that's just what men do, apparently.
That a lot of people have forgotten about how difficult and how competitive it is as a man. We're always in constant competition with each other. And the dangerous thing about overly emotional men is that they're dangerous. They're genuinely dangerous. This is what's crazy. All these people who talk about toxic masculinity and how bad it is for men to be traditionally masculine. A traditionally masculine man does things he doesn't feel like doing because it is his duty to do them. He charges into the building because it is his duty. Not because he feels like it, because it is his duty. We're now teaching the new generation of men that they don't have duty and they can just act on their feelings and act how they feel and they don't have to act as a man should. Do you know what happens when you get men who just act how they feel? You get school shooters, you get violence, you get rapists. Men who do not control their emotions are dangerous. If you find a man who is stoic, he's not going to hurt people. He's going to sit and think about his actions very carefully, and he's going to be a good man who protects and provides for his family. You find a man who just acts out on impulse and does whatever he feels like, you're going to find a dangerous man. Sitting here telling men to cry more and act with their feelings and it's okay to feel this way, that way, etc., and have no self-control. That is why we have the problems we have in the world. Absolutely and utterly wrong. So when they talk about toxic masculinity, they have it completely inversed on its head, completely and utterly wrong. We need to be teaching stoicism. We need to be teaching young men to understand that the world is very, very difficult. It's hard to be a man. You're going to feel bad sometimes. You just suck it up and perform anyway.
It is terrifying to think that he just thinks this is what the average man is like. And it's terrifying that he doesn't understand the difference between allowing yourself to process your emotions and acting violently and impulsively. So all this stuff being taught to particularly young men, what is the consequence of it? How does this affect men and their friendships and their loneliness? Well, simply as you can imagine, and as I've been basically telling you throughout this video, it disconnects men from each other. It's as simple as that. It makes them unable to open up deeply. It stops them having as many friends and often having as many close friends. Mark Green writes that because ridiculously, we have gendered emotionally centered capacities like empathy, caregiving, and nurturing as feminine, and of course, due to the lower status of the feminine in our culture, exhibiting feminine capabilities as a step down for men. Similarly, the Happiness.com article argues that many men growing up are taught to not express our vulnerability as we're shown by society and the media that it's something weak. We've been told to keep a stiff upper lip and keep calm and carry on, and men should not express their feelings. Meanwhile, Liz Plank argues that toxic masculinity is an epidemic which knows no borders. It starts when we equate emotion with weakness and direct boys to display strength no matter what. It shows up in the way we expect and encourage girls to show their true emotions while we demand that boys hide them from us. She goes on to say that we live in a culture that teaches boys stoicism over authenticity, dominance over empathy. Boys are taught not to ask questions because asking for help would suggest a lack of leadership instead of being an acute sign of it. And what happens when a man does try and speak out about the loneliness he may be experiencing? Well, Max Dickens wrote a story about, I say a story, like he told what happened about 52-year-old Mark Gaisford, who posted online about feeling alone despite being an outgoing man who was popular in the office where he worked, but how he still felt he had no friends or connections outside of work. He was vulnerable, he opened up, and he was met with other men saying things like, "You're pathetic, what a whiny article, no wonder he's got no friends. Sounds like this guy needs some testosterone," and "Man up, you wimp." All examples of toxic masculinity on show, making the problem worse because now neither Mark nor other men reading these comments will feel safe to open up about their own feelings, and so will never be able to find a solution, and instead will stay more and more lonely. And there are serious consequences of this. It's not just loneliness, but Liz compiled information from several studies which found that the more a man feels forced to identify with these toxically masculine traits, such as stoicism, the more likely he is to have lower well-being, poorer mental health, display violent behaviour, be more likely to sexually harass women, and of course, have fewer relationships with other men. She argues that this is a crisis because men are left yearning for intimacy but unable to ask for it. And how do men respond to this? Well, we'll talk about people who actually recognise the problem and try and do something about it later in this video, but what about those who don't want to admit they're lonely, or think that admitting it somehow makes them less manly? As we'll see in the next section, it's easy for these types of men to seek solace online, and in the manosphere, as a lot of people call it, and this can lead to them internalising more harmful ideas about their gender identity and lifestyle. And you know, it's cyclical. Socialization leads to them internalising toxic traits, which makes them feel lonely, so they fall down radical rabbit holes looking for companionship and instead just find more toxic ideals that they internalise, and then that ultimately makes them more and more lonely in the long run. It doesn't solve anything, it's exacerbating the problem. And here's the thing that I think a lot of people forget. People like Charlie Kirk and Matt Walsh are, or were, millionaires because they profit off making people angry and keeping them divided and lonely. They say they care about male loneliness, but they only profit when you are lonely. They don't actually care about the well-being of the average man. They don't care about your mental health. They don't care about your health at all. They just want to generate an us versus them, so you're looking in the wrong places for the problem, and men like them can keep taking advantage of this and hoard all the wealth they can. They profit off your suffering. And instead of getting angry at them like you should, these men turn to getting angry at women, at minorities, at, immigrants, disabled people, whatever. They get angry in the wrong places. And the other thing is, this isn't something that, this socialization and internalization of toxic traits, this isn't something that occurs naturally. Studies show that many young boys display the same levels of emotional openness and desire for connection as young girls do until they hit a certain age, and it's essentially socialized out of them. Partly by general societal expectations, and also partly by a lot of these manosphere creators. Mark Green argues in his 2017 article, The Terrible Price of Our Epidemic of Male Loneliness, that our culture of male emotional toughness weans boys and men off the intuitive capacities for emotional connection that they're born with. Many boys never have the opportunity to explore and grow these relational capacities at all, taught from birth instead to man up and be a man, elevating toughness and assertiveness over connection and empathy, which is completely in line with what Niobe Wade found and argues in her book, Deep Secrets, Boys' Friendships and the Crisis of Connection. She found that out of all the boys she interviewed and studied, many young boys are affectionate and open in their friendships with each other until they start to get older and hit their teen years. And it's nothing about their biology obviously they're going through puberty, but that's not what causes the change. What's changed is the way they view and are viewed by other men and the expectations that they set for themselves and other men. She writes, listening to boys, particularly those in early middle adolescence, speaking about their male friendships is like reading an old-fashioned romance novel. Which again is something we've seen throughout history. This is quite normal. Boys speak about their male friends with abandon, referring to them as people whom they love. They talk in great detail and with tremendous effect about their best friends, with whom they share their deepest secrets, and without whom they would, according to 15-year-old Malcolm, feel lost. However, Niobe found, and this And this also aligns with what Michael Kimmel wrote about in his book Guyland, which she also references, that when boys hit around 16 or so, they start to adhere to a new code, which I quote, demands that boys and young men shut down emotionally, that they suppress compassion and inflate ambition. She goes on to write that at the age of 16 or 17, as their minds are increasingly attuned to cultural messages about manhood and maturity, boys begin to distance themselves from the relationships they hold most dear, their closest male friendships. They become more distrustful and less willing to be close with their male peers and believe such behaviour, even emotional acuity, put them at risk of being labelled as girly, immature, or gay. Again, that homophobia coming into play again. Niobe argues that this is the result of socialization, as I keep saying, as they're taught to be emotionally stoic, aggressive, and seemingly invulnerable, and that as a result, boys feel effeminate not only if they express emotions, but even if they feel them. Our hypermasculine American culture, she writes, frames boys and men as unable to have, and thus as uninterested in having intimate male friendships. And as we continue to see, the consequences of this are not just about male loneliness, but this disconnect from their peers and unwillingness to be emotionally open directly correlates with an increase in mental health issues and suicide attempts. To end this section with a quote from Laura Bates and her wonderful book, Men Who Hate Women, she says, those who speak of toxic masculinity are not criticizing men, but rather defending them, describing an ideology and a system that pressures boys and men in our societies, in our families, to conform to unrealistic, unhealthy, and unsustainable ideals. Crushing gender stereotypes are damaging to men as individuals, as well as to the society in which they live. Tackling this problem, dismantling these pressures, is a matter of life and death for our boys, and it really, really is. So part 3, what are the consequences of male loneliness if we just leave it unchecked? So let's talk more for a moment about what happens to these lonely men who are socialized to internalize toxic masculine traits if we just leave them be. As I mentioned in the last section, they are far more likely to be radicalized online and sink further into loneliness and depression and health problems. However, it's not just these men who continue to suffer. It can result in their self-hatred being turned outwards and directed towards women, often in the form of physical and sexual violence. So a lot of the consequences of what happens to these men is discussed in various books by the fantastic Laura Bates, including one of her earlier books, Men Who Hate Women, and her new book, The New Age of Sexism. In her earlier book, Men Who Hate Women, she discussed many of the dangerous online communities that these lonely men often find themselves in. Incel forums, MGTOW, Red Pill forums, even pickup artist communities. And as part of her research, she created brand new social media accounts posing as Alex, a lonely young man, and she found just how quickly the algorithm served him misogynistic, harmful content, telling him to suppress his feelings unless they were anger and resentment. She writes that the incel community is the most violent corner of the so-called manosphere. It's a community devoted to violent hatred of women. A community that actively recruits members who might have very real problems and vulnerabilities and tells them that women are the cause of their woes. A community in whose name over 100 people, mostly women, have been murdered or injured in the past 10 years. However, it is worth noting that this book was published in 2020, and I would say that number is probably considerably higher by now. She said of her fictional Alex, which was based on the feelings and actions of real men, that the idea of other men who felt similarly empty and frustrated appealed to Alex. He liked the idea of being one of many instead of the odd one out. She also specifies that some new recruits stumble upon the incel community while looking for answers to life problems or loneliness. Similarly, when discussing the pickup artist community, she describes it as an industry that exploits men's worst fears and preys on their vulnerabilities and literally trains them in harassment, stalking, and even sexual assault, targeting shy or romantically unsuccessful men as their disciples. And while a community of people experiencing similar feelings can be an amazing thing, as we'll see in the next section of this video, when those become toxic echo chambers instead of actual support networks, it can be really damn dangerous for everyone involved. Instead of finding real connection, friendship, and support, fictional Alex and countless real men out there were almost immediately advised that he might as well kill himself, his life wasn't worth living, that nothing would ever change. Is it any wonder that men's mental health is in the toilet when they're saying this to each other? And it's important to note that even these men saying this stuff, they're not just pure evil and helpless, they are victims too. They all stumbled into this because they were struggling, they were lonely, they had self-esteem, and they were in pain. Laura notes that many posts read as a cry for help, and yet usually devolve into graphic discussions of the benefits of raping women or committing other types of sexual violence, or just violence in general. As she notes, this isn't a cut and dried situation of victims being preyed upon by ideologues. It's possible for one incel to be both victim and violent predator. The most frustrating part of my experience, writes Laura, was seeing posts from men who were vulnerable or in pain, many of them young boys going through the typical tumult of adolescent hormonal angst and looking for some guidance to help them through it, and then watching as these men and boys collided catastrophically with deeply twisted and misogynistic views supported by pseudoscience and fake statistics at precisely the moment when they may have been most impressionable. And this is why I think it's so important we talk about these issues so we can ensure future generations never get to this stage again and are instead taught to be open with their feelings. They're taught how to form real connections with people before they fall down rabbit holes like this and get radicalized. But also so that people who are already in these communities know that there is a way out and know that misery, hopelessness, and violence are not their only options in life. In her latest book, The New Age of Sexism, Laura focuses less on online communities and more on other types of new technology which these men are turning to. In these instances, they're not looking for long-term solutions to build self-esteem, undo years of unhealthy socialization, and help them build authentic connection. Instead, they find short-term solutions to plaster over the cracks, and sadly, these likely cause more harm than good. Two examples in particular that she gives are when lonely men turn to either sex robots or AI romantic chatbots. These may seem harmless at a glance, but Laura dives deep into the benefits and problems associated with each. She writes that the sex robot manufacturers often make grandiose claims to be supporting men who are extremely lonely or socially awkward by facilitating access to companionship and a fulfilling sex life. She even goes as far as to, quote, the founder of one particular company saying, "This has enormous potential to solve some of those loneliness problems." And these are big claims that have made these men a lot of money, just like a lot of these manosphere creators and conservative creators and people who manufacture anger for a living. It's almost like there's big money in male loneliness and offering them temporary solutions while actually keeping them lonely. Not to sound cynical, but I am. However, it's not just the men that suffer here. Let's say these dolls really did make men less lonely. Why should that be at the expense of women? Laura writes that none of this very laudable, apparent philanthropic motivation explains why the dolls themselves should universally reinforce the most unrealistic, cartoonish images of hyper-sexualized young women. The dolls universally play into all outdated, sizist, racist, ableist beauty standards that already have a massively damaging impact on women's lives. She goes on to write, so even if we buy into the line that the main purpose of the sex robots is to support lonely men, there is no denying that this comes at a very high cost to women and girls, not to mention the way it plays into the misogynistic assumption that any man has an inherent right to sex and companionship regardless of his behaviour, which teeters perilously close to the incel ideology. And she is right. And this is all very reminiscent to me of how a lot of incels believe we need to redistribute sex or legalize rape, or even Jordan Peterson's ridiculous claims that we need enforced monogamy. You know, he liked to try to dial back that statement and be like, I didn't mean enforced monogamy, I just meant we should normalize monogamy.
She knew, the journalist knew perfectly well what I meant by enforced monogamy. She's not stupid.
You use it as if everybody would understand it because you're an intellectual and because you're a professor and this is what you do.
It was also 2 minutes out of a 2-day conversation.
Yes,
you know, it's like, so it was something we just glanced over. Well, it's so that was funny in some sense, because my sense is if you want to pillory someone, you should attribute to them views that someone somewhere has had. And the implication of that part of the New York Times article was that I wanted to, take nubile young women at the point of a gun under state enforcement and deliver them to useless men. It's like no one has ever believed that. So
but it
attributing
sounds like that. It's a real, the optics of that statement are very bad. But
And it's like, well, monogamy is already normalized, but you didn't say normalized monogamy. You said enforced monogamy. And for a man who is very pedantic about the words he used, enforced has some pretty serious connotations there, mate. Now, some people like Matt Walsh, and also Shoe on Head to some extent, seem to think that it's laughable and worthy of mocking to be concerned that the things will harm men also harm women.
Now, the masculinity expert who coined that phrase about the cowboy mentality is a woman named Niobe Way. And she, of course, quickly identifies the real victims in the story of male loneliness. Can you guess who the real victims are? Who's most put upon by male loneliness? Well, Niobe says it's women. Think of the women. Men are lonely. Women most impacted. She says, quote, women end up being the therapists for their husbands, and more are getting sick of it. Yes, God forbid wives have to listen to their husbands and offer them solace and comfort. They're sick of it, says masculinity expert Niobe. That's not a conflicting message at all, is it? On one hand, men need to open up more, but on the other hand, if they do open up, then they're putting an unfair burden on their wives who are being asked to do too much emotional labor.
Now, this might come as a shock to you, but not everything has to do with women. Sometimes we can talk about other things. Sometimes those other things are not women.
So admittedly, this little bit that he's talking about here was mostly in regards to the emotional labor women have to do, which is something we'll be discussing later. But I think it's worth mentioning now, because this idea that we shouldn't be concerned with how this behavior affects people who aren't just men is bizarre to me. Conservative men are some of the first people to say, yes, but what about X, Y, and Z affecting men when you talk about issues affecting women? When we talk about, the normalization of rape culture, the sheer numbers of women being raped or victims of domestic violence, they're the first to say, yeah, but have you thought about the man's life you're ruining by, telling the world he's a rapist? They're the first ones to bring up men's well-being in response to issues affecting and hurting women. So why can't we also bring up the fact that men's loneliness hurts women too? With all that in mind, let's look at another example. This time, let's see what Laura Bates has to say about AI romantic chatbots. This refers to artificially intelligent chatbots, which will talk with people acting almost as though they're real people. People, mostly men, open up to them. They feel safe doing so as it's not a real person, but they quickly start to feel real feelings for them. Often these chatbots respond with kindness, compassion, and sometimes replicate romantic feelings or flirting, or at least make it seem like they are. There absolutely are benefits to this, we can't deny it. Laura wrote that a study from Stanford University found that Replica, one of the common chatbots, has had a significant impact in supporting some participants' mental health. Of the 1,006 students surveyed, 30 reported without being asked that Replica had stopped them from attempting suicide. And that is amazing. That is not something we should discount. That is a really important thing that they're doing. However, it's important to note that this isn't a long-term solution, is it? You can't replace authentic human connection with a computer program and expect it to have the same long-term benefits. And it definitely doesn't tackle the underlying problems causing loneliness. In fact, none of these solutions that we've mentioned in this section do. As Laura writes and reminds us, human connection is vital, and the two-way, sometimes messy, sometimes funny, sometimes uncomfortable navigation of a real relationship cannot be replicated by a robot or AI chatbot, any more than incel isolation can be solved by spending days on end in online forums filled with exclusively bitter misogynistic men. But it's not just the emotional consequence of this. There are actually other problems too. What a lot of people don't realize is that although they might feel more comfortable opening up about their deepest, darkest feelings to a chatbot because, they feel less likely to be judged, they forget that a lot of these chatbots are actually less trustworthy in the grand scheme of things because many are mining data and information about you and selling it on. According to Laura's research, the fine print of one chatbot app even confessed that it would collect personal information relating to issues such as sexual health, prescribed medication, and gender-affirming care. Is this, and not only collect it, but then sell it on to other people, so is this lack of privacy and commodification of your private thoughts really worth a way to temporarily alleviate loneliness? And what of these people, mostly men, who don't even use these quick fix options, but simply do nothing at all? Well, to reiterate what we've been saying so far, and I feel like I keep saying it over and over, but it needs driving home, according to Liz Plank, and I quote, "Loneliness is one of the greatest threats to a person's health. It is associated with weaker immune systems and can cause early death." But it's not just physical health, remember. As she reminds us, in America, for example, it is easier to get a gun than a therapist, which is why without help, without therapy, without recognizing the problem and addressing it, male suicide rates will only continue to increase. So to summarize, if we ignore these problems men face and keep letting them simply plaster over the cracks instead of addressing the underlying causes, such as the damaging socialization and toxic masculinity that they're internalizing, then we're basically handing these people a death sentence. That's why we need to talk about this and actively do something about it. So, what are people who have already identified their loneliness trying to do about it, and is it actually helping? Let's move on to part 4, finding friendship. I have read a lot of books over the years, not just for this video, but just in general, because I myself have experienced varying degrees of feeling lonely. I've read books on embracing being alone without feeling lonely, on how to make friends with people, how to develop and deepen friendships, how to be in a relationship, how to deal with breakups, all sorts. I find it helps to understand different perspectives and figure out what's the best way to do things in my life. I quite like reading these books. I find them interesting, and I talk about them a lot in videos. Loneliness is something that I personally am very familiar with. I've had periods of my life when I've had no friends at all and faced a lot of bullying. I've had periods where I've had friends and people around me but felt disconnected from them. And I've had periods in my life when I haven't been lonely at all. I've had periods of my life when I spent a lot of time alone but also not experienced loneliness. I've had friends that I feel connected with on a deeper level and friends that I never really felt I fit in with. Like, I've experienced a whole range of everything. And I read a lot of books on these topics because this is how I cope with this stuff. This is how I learn about this stuff. This is how I try and make sense of my own life. And more specifically, I think I wanted to know that I wasn't alone in these feelings. And it turns out I'm not. I'm absolutely not. I wanted to know if there's a way out, and there is. I wanted to know if there are steps I can take to actively help myself, and there are. However, one of the things I noticed while researching this video in particular is that, interestingly, most of the books on the topic are actually written by women. At least the majority of the ones that I found and read were. Whether these are books about dealing with loneliness, thriving while alone or single, or making friends when you feel lonely, the vast majority of books I found on this topic were written by women and being read and reviewed by women. Just to give you a few examples, The Unexpected Joy of Being Single by Catherine Gray, The Art of Living Alone and Loving It by Jane Matthews, How to Be Alone by Lane Moore, How to Be Single and Happy by Jennifer L. Tates, Alonement, How to Be Alone and Absolutely Own It by Francesca Spencer, Platonic, How the Science of Attachment Can Help You Make and Keep Friends by Marissa Franco, The Art of Showing Up, How to Be There for Yourself and Your People by Rachel Wilkerson Miller, Friendmacy, 10 Ways to Improve Your Friendships and Deepen Your Life by Shasta Nelson, The Joy of Connections, 100 Ways to Beat Loneliness and Live a Happier, More Meaningful Life by Dr. Ruth K. Westheimer, can't even say that, Modern Friendship, How to Nurture Our Most Valued Connections by Anna Goldfarb, and so on and so on. This barely scratches the surface of the ones that I've read, and I found so many others. And then when I specifically tried searching for books about male loneliness and fostering friendships amongst men, I genuinely struggled to find as many. They were very, very rare in comparison. If the male loneliness epidemic is so serious and so many men are talking about it, why is no one actually doing anything about it? Why are no men writing books on this or actively trying to help other men or help themselves? Why is it that one of the only books I found specifically about the male loneliness epidemic was actually written by a woman? For the Love of Men, A New Vision for Mindful Masculinity by Liz Plank. And I'm not the only one who noticed this trend. Look at this very fast review of some of the online articles and how he points out they're all written by women.
What is causing our epidemic of loneliness and how can we fix it? This is written by Elizabeth Ross. Might get back to this. This says men's loneliness is a feminist issue in Men Without Women. This is by Claire Urbanski. Might go back to this too. And then this is the male loneliness epidemic and how it affects fathers. This is written by Shannon Carpenter. I looked it up. This Shannon is a woman. Again, we might go back to this as well. Those are big mights. Also, just in the general search of like what is the male loneliness epidemic, as you can see, woman, this is like a general thing. I don't know what it is. This also kind of shows a general thing. It doesn't really give me a preview. And then there's a woman right here. And then woman.
I'm genuinely curious as to why it's mostly women who are being proactive in addressing this issue and not more men. That said, thankfully, some of the books were written by men. We have Billy No Mates by Max Dickens, as I mentioned quite a lot, and I think it's a fantastic book on this topic, written by a man, for men. I think it's great. There's also The Loneliness Cure, 6 Strategies for Finding Real Connections in Your Life by Corey Lloyd, and The Cure for Loneliness, original titles there, How to Feel Connected and Escape Isolation by William or Bill Howard. And yet, even these books, with the exception of Max's, the 2 by Corey and William there, even those books I have a few criticisms of, but at least I can applaud them for recognising the problem and trying, which is more than so many other men are doing. What I found far more concerning, though, was that the books that were written for men, by men, a lot of them were just burying their head in the sand and pretending that loneliness doesn't exist amongst men, telling men to stay stoic and quiet, some just flat out rejecting empathy and giving really terrible advice. Take this example from Against Empathy by Paul Bloom. He states, empathy has its merits. It can be a great source of pleasure involved in art and fiction and sports, and it can be a valuable aspect of intimate relationships. But on the whole, it's a poor moral guide. It grounds foolish judgments and often motivates indifference and cruelty. It can lead to irrational and unfair political decisions. It can corrode certain important relationships, such as between a doctor and a patient, and make us worse at being friends, parents, husbands, and wives. I'm against empathy, and one of the goals of this book is to persuade you to be against empathy too. He later goes on to argue that this is so laughably stupid. He goes on to argue that Nazis caused the Holocaust because they had too much empathy. Ridiculous. And it's not the only time he does it either. There's a lot of Nazi references in this book, and he spends a lot of time comparing having empathy to racism, which is just bizarre. He's literally saying if you're empathetic, then you're a worse friend, parent, and spouse. Is it any wonder men are struggling and lonely when they're being fed rubbish like this? The whole book is a mess, to be fair. He suggests at one point if you lack empathy in your life, then you should lie on any first date you go on so that you don't show a potential partner your real self. And he consistently brings up this idea that blood is thicker than water over and over as a justification for why it's okay to screw over strangers to help your family. And he even goes as far as to give an example of a man who genuinely said he would actively kill everyone in a room to prolong the life of his son, and why that's apparently a good thing and we shouldn't have empathy for strangers. It is truly bizarre. Thankfully, not all books are that extreme, but when you see the stuff that men are listening to and being fed, it's kind of easy to see why they're not forming these deep connections, isn't it? Overall, though, what I did find interesting is, even in these books that admit that men can be lonely and offer advice to them, one of the biggest differences I found is in the way that men and women write about loneliness. And the biggest difference I found is that men tend to look at it on a micro scale, on an individual scale, and say, this is a you problem, this is no one else's problem, this is a you problem, only you can fix it, what are you going to do about it? Whereas women tend to look at the big picture and say, hey, so many of us going through this. There's societal problems, there's ideological problems, there's socialization problems. Here's how you can fix it on an individual level, but also here's some big changes we need to make it better for everyone else. Men were very micro, women very macro. So, to give you a few examples, Bill or William Howard, he goes by both, he wrote about the barriers to connection in his book, The Cure for Loneliness, and he listed things, the barriers, as individual things, like people are only lonely, people don't have connections when they don't have enough money to go out, people being hurt from past relationships, childhood trauma, a person having low self-confidence, lack of time for social activities, for example. He frames loneliness and isolation as something caused by an individual and their specific approach to life that only they can change and that only they have caused. So instead of, why is our economy in the toilet and why can't the average person afford to socialize, are there any social policy changes that could maybe fix this and help millions of people? He approaches it more of, well, if you're poor, you need to make more money so you can do stuff. The women writers on this topic, however, took a very different approach by looking at it more of a societal level. Liz Plank, for example, wrote about how boys and men feel more isolated and less likely to form deep and meaningful connections with people because of how they've been socialized, and discussed ways which we can be better influences on young boys going forward. She looked at the bigger picture and the connection between toxic masculinity and male loneliness. She looked at the overall effects of capitalism and how that's impacted loneliness and connection for all people. And again, she was like, what changes can we make as a society to make this better, not just for us now, but for future generations? Similarly, Amy Lutkin looked at the bigger picture in her memoir, The Lonely Hunter, How Our Search for Love is Broken, as did Francesca Spector in her book Alonement, as they discussed in detail the way in which society forces people to feel they need a partner and demonizes people who are alone by choice or not. These women still offered solutions on a personal level to the individual readers of their book, but they were much more willing to look at the larger causes of loneliness and offer solutions as to how we can prevent loneliness in other people instead of just looking at it as ourselves on an individual level. It was also interesting to me how little introspection and self-acceptance were a part of the men's books on loneliness. The closest that Bill Howard got was stuff like this. So he spoke about this researcher called Glasser, who often asked people what they didn't want, e.g. to be alone, followed by what they do want, e.g. to have a caring friend they trust. He would then ask them what they can do to get what they want. The power of this question is that it implies the person has agency to obtain what they want. Once they see what they want, they can begin the journey to achieve it. Ah yes, think about what you want and how to achieve it, and then you can start to achieve it. Groundbreaking advice. Like the average woman isn't doing this constantly in every aspect of her life. His solutions like this may seem novel to him and his primarily male readers, but to the average woman reading this book, this level of personal introspection, especially in regards to friendships and social interactions, I think is far more common. And I think it's important to ask why this is, as authors like Liz Plank do. As we mentioned earlier, she spends a lot of time talking about the causes and consequences of toxic masculinity, saying that toxic definitions of masculinity make it harder for men to develop and maintain simple relationships. If you aren't trained to understand your emotions, it's fairly predictable that you'll have difficulty understanding the emotions of others. Her solutions to loneliness, because of this, involved overhauling our entire understanding of gender and redefining masculinity to be more positive, and encouraging men in particular to get in touch with their own emotional needs. Other women wrote about personal solutions to loneliness too, each starting with accepting yourself and really getting to understand and know yourself so that alone doesn't have to mean lonely. For example, Francesca Spector wrote in her book Alonement, your relationship with yourself by default is the most important one you will ever have. Your monogamous partnership with yourself is the only constant, unalterable relationship you'll ever have. She goes on to say that learning to value alone time is without a doubt the most radical, important lesson I've learned in my life to date. Another example comes from Alexander Horrigan and Sally McMullen, who wrote Finding Your People, The Ultimate Guide to Friendship, which actually opens with the chapter Be Your Own Bestie, which claims, we'll show you how the friendship you have with yourself is the most fruitful of all, and how it has a flow-on effect to all other relationships in your life, be they romantic, familial, or platonic. They say once your cup is full of self-love, you have overflow to share with others. It's a common and incorrect notion, especially for women, that if you love yourself, you're vain, egotistical, and arrogant. This false idea limits our individual growth and feeds the narrative that our worth is sourced externally. So they're definitely big on encouraging self-esteem and self-love as the foundation of being a better friend to others. They spend the chapter talking about learning to listen to and accept and experience your emotions and how this can help you in the long term enjoy your own company. It's not about suppressing your emotions, it's about letting them be and writing them out and feeling them. They say when you genuinely enjoy your own company, this attitude becomes infectious to those around you. And now that you don't have a whirlwind of spam, junk, and trash emails swirling around in your head, you have the energy and clarity to enjoy yourself and give more to your friendships. You'll avoid bringing baggage into friendships and trauma dumping on people you care about. You will also have the mental space to better support those around you. You've dealt with your own crap, so when a good friend needs to lean on you, it's not draining your own mental energy to be there for them. Amazing. Love that. What a great foundation. Meanwhile, Bill, on the other hand, says that you need to practice self-compassion by pretending negative emotions aren't real. Be mindful of emotions, he writes, and that's a great start. I wish he'd just stopped there. Self-compassion can be facilitated by accepting that our automatic negative thoughts are nothing more than thoughts. They're just random information and there's no evidence that they're true. When you don't over-identify with negative thoughts, which lead to negative feelings, you allow them to leave as fast as they arrive. And I kind of get he might be saying don't dwell on the negative, but it kind of comes across as him just saying just suppress your emotions, pretend they're not real, it's just in your head, stuff in your head isn't real, oof, don't be silly. It's not be kind to yourself, it's ignore how you're really feeling and plaster over the cracks, and that feels unhealthy. And I'm not just saying this out of nowhere, it's reflected throughout the whole book. In other parts, he states you need to train your resiliency as though you're weight training. He literally makes that comparison, and that this involves moving from an emotionally charged state to a calmer state where you think consciously, by which he means suppress your emotions again. Be resilient by suppressing your emotions. He says, to be mastered, resiliency requires intention, focus, and practice. Again, he means stop letting those pesky emotions influence you and train yourself to be strong, i.e. emotionless and logical all the time. It's not promoting emotional literacy or emotional maturity or emotional communication. It's promoting suppressing them and pretending they're not there. It's again, pro-stoicism, like so much of this content made by men for men. This is in the same vein as the nonsense that Matt Walsh spreads. He claims that having emotions or speaking to men is feminine and that real men simply sit next to each other in silence and never talk. Seriously.
Okay, we can't expect corporate media's masculinity experts to understand this because their masculinity experts are all effeminate. But any normal man can attest that men tend to bond while engaging in a shared activity. And I don't mean yoga, okay? I mean like one that doesn't require a lot of talking, like sitting and watching the game or fishing or golfing, playing pickup basketball and so on. I went out fishing with my brother-in-law a few weeks ago, and when we came back, my wife asked me what we talked about, and I said, I don't know, nothing really. You didn't talk about anything? You didn't talk about it? Well, we talked about fishing. You went fishing and you just talked about fishing? What's going on in his life? What's going on? What did you talk about? We didn't talk about much. The solution isn't that we sit around and talk about our feelings. It's that we do a whole lot less of that sort of thing and get back to being men again.
And I mean, one, it sounds like he has a boring life. And two, Matt Walsh seems like such a miserable man. I don't think I've ever seen him smile. Why would I take advice on how to be happy and fulfilled from him when he just seems miserable and like he hates everyone? Liz Plank wrote that the patriarchy doesn't just convince men that they don't have emotional needs, it also leads men to feel embarrassed when those needs naturally occur, which they do, which leads those feelings to come out in other, less productive ways. Also, my jaw cracked while I was reading that, and if you heard it, I'm so sorry, it was very uncomfortable. She goes on to say, one study on male college students found that fear of emotion was correlated with an increased likelihood of aggression and hostility. And I think that's what we see in small snippets of books like Bill's and the videos from Matt Walsh. They spend such a short amount of time talking about, being kind to yourself, but ignore the sad thoughts. Whereas women like Dr. Ruth Westheimer, for example, author of The Joy of Connection, 100 Ways to Beat Loneliness and Live a Happier and More Meaningful Life, she dedicates a whole chapter to bringing up the reader's self-esteem and reminding them things like self is the most important component of connection. You must pay attention to your thoughts, feelings, and actions, the ones that are holding you back from making the types of connections you want most. Self-awareness leads to coping strategies and solutions, builds self-esteem and confidence, and smooths communication with others so that you can nurture and maintain healthy relationships. With reflection, you're able to identify areas for improvement and follow through with your aspirations. She also repeatedly encourages her readers to accept their negative thoughts and feelings in order to work through them. It's not about suppressing, it's not about resilience, it's not about, we push this down because they're not real, it's just in your head. Instead, she says the first step to fixing any problem is to admit that it exists. If loneliness is what is affecting you, then what better way to face your problem than having to stand in front of a mirror and say it out loud? You may feel silly, you may cry, but having the problem out in the open is your first step towards making the necessary changes to become less lonely. The other thing I found really interesting, and this is something we mentioned earlier in the video, is that a lot of the books written by men seem to almost gamify friendships and relationships. Corey Floyd, throughout his whole book, was like, here's 6 strategies to overcome loneliness. And he makes it into a game. He's like, try this, here's an experiment. Like, he literally calls things experiments and gives you step-by-step guides. Like, let me read you a few examples. Try this. Think of one behavior. Hugging, undivided attention, more time spent together, or so on. That you most desire more frequently from a friend or loved one. Then formulate 2 strategies for inviting that behavior. If it's kisses from your romantic partner you crave, give 3 kiss coupons as a gift. Now that's not so bad on its own, but it's definitely worth noting the different approaches from men. Corey wasn't the only one though. Bill Howard gamifies connection by labeling different levels of connection. You can have level 5, intimate, level 4, valued, level 1, new, and everything in between. And he tells people to do social connection experiments and gives this example. I'm not going to read the whole thing, it's long, it's like 2 pages of this, but the targeted goal is to develop 1 new authentic professional relationship, a level 3 authentic connection. I've included the microsteps to achieve the goal. 1. Join professional online community like LinkedIn to meet new professionals. Step 2. Research LinkedIn professionals who have the same interests as you and with whom you could see a potential alignment to find like-minded professionals based on their profile. Step 3. Pick 3 people you would like to meet, to focus on who I will try with first. Step 4. Invite each person to connect to your professional network and explain why you invited them, and so on and so on. He writes about this, like at the end, if you start a social connections experiment and don't finish, that can cause your brain to think you can't overcome this fear, only reinforcing or wiring. Don't worry, you can attempt each step several times. And don't forget to measure authentic connections progress. It's helpful to measure the progress of your social connections experiments above and beyond the daily experiment logs that you keep. Repeat the authentic connections baseline from step 1 every month as you proceed your experiments. Using a scale of 1, strongly disagree, 3, moderately agree, or 5, strongly agree, rate the degree of confidence you have for each of the following statements. I have authentic connections in my life I'm satisfied with. I'm confident I can close my social connection. I'm confident I can close my social connection gaps, and so on and so on. And you get a total score at the end of it. Again, it's not so much that there's anything inherently wrong with this approach. I'm sure it will work for some people, but to me it feels very inauthentic and impersonal. And it is kind of gamifying this whole act of friendship and connection. And it's like you're craving authentic, deep connection with someone. Can you really get that by performing experiments, keeping daily logs, and scoring your friendships with people? In their books, by contrast, women offered strategies for how to, how to find friendships and how to deepen friendships, but they felt less like formulate a strategy and do this and this and this and experiment and score and do, and they were a bit more authentic. Take this example from Ruth Westheimer. She says the spark that drives all kinds of relationships forwards is doing activities together, making the choice to have fun together, or deciding to carve out a few moments to have a private discussion. It communicates interest, not obligation, and the communication of mutual interest is essential for turning acquaintances into deeper connections. She goes on to give examples of going to watch tennis matches with a friend, and she says our physical proximity is not the reason our long-time friendship grew. It grew because we made the choice to break away from the group and concentrate on each other. Sharing experiences creates opportunities to appreciate people and see them in a new light. It also creates time to nurture relationships. So she's still offering practical advice. She's saying, do these activities together. Here's an example of something you can do. Here's the reasoning behind it, carving out time, being intentionally spending time with them. But it feels a lot less prescriptive. It feels less calculated. It's less about trying to quantify a relationship and more about just figuring out what's right in your life. Again, compare the scorekeeping and step-by-step experiments offered by Bill Howard to what a woman like Rachel Wilkerson Miller writes in her book, The Art of Showing Up, How to Be There for Yourself and Your People. Her ideas feel, again, more organic, less like a game. The focus is on finding the right connections, not on just collecting a whole bunch of them. Rachel writes, figure out where your potential friends hang out. If you're trying to make new friends, it helps to frequent places where other people with similar interests are likely to be. Are there any classes where your potential pals might be? Do any of your favourite bands do in-store events? Are you in any Facebook groups where local folk might be interested in meeting up in person? It might take some trial and error, but eventually you'll have that moment where you realise, oh, this is where my people are. And instead of scoring the relationships and friendships and, doing tests and experiments and repeating steps, instead she just reminds the reader, don't expect friendships to happen overnight. One study suggests that casual friendships can emerge around 30 hours of interaction, and that good friendships require around 140 hours, but there are a lot of factors that can influence these estimates, including the number of weeks those hours are spread across, and the way you spend those hours matters a lot. Ultimately, making a new friend involves some luck and magic. It requires time and also good timing. So don't get terribly discouraged if you're meeting people you like, but you don't have a new BFF yet. You'll get there. And that, I think, is one of the big things I noticed. Men offer advice for making as many surface level connections as possible and trying to quantify the relationships you already have, and focusing on, well, if you get more and more and more, one of them's likely to work out, right? It's very scattergun. Whereas the women writing seem more concerned with the quality of the friendships in your life, and they offer advice for how to find the right people in the first place, how to deepen the relationship, and find, one right friendship, instead of just, well, go for as many as you can and one will surely work out, And I think it comes back to what we were saying in the first part of this video about the difference between attention and connection, like authentic connection, The men writing about this seem to think the solution is give a lot of attention to a lot of people, get a lot of attention back, maybe something will stick. Whereas the women are a little more intentional. It's more like work on yourself, figure out what you need, go search for that in particular, and when you find it, nurture it. I'm not saying the first approach, the men's approach, won't work, but I am saying in general, we know men have a different experience of loneliness, and we know they have less deep, authentic connections with people, so maybe their approach just is not working and they do need to try something else. Just a suggestion. Okay, you'll have to excuse I'm filming this the next day, but I actually have an example of this to show you, and in this clip this man is complaining that women's standards are too high and that men have to swipe 1,000 times on dating apps just to get one date. It's not great. Let's watch.
You can't tell women to lower their expectations, but this is the reality. When you ask a man if you could have a woman who had 80% of everything you wanted, 75% say, yeah, I'm on board. Mm-hmm. When you say to a woman, a man has 80% of what you want, 75% say that's not enough. I read that on Tinder, a man of average attractiveness has to swipe right 200 times to get one coffee, and then 4 of those 5 coffees will ghost him. They will decide they don't want to meet him or they won't show up. That means a guy of average attractiveness has to swipe right 1,000 times to get one coffee. Now, what does that tell that guy? Women don't value me. Women make me feel rejected.
This is interesting, and I really wonder, one, is he just pulling these stats out of his bum, or does he have proof for it? And 2, I wonder how many times women are swiping in order to get just one date with a man who isn't creepy or predatory. And the thing is, I actually have a very different takeaway from, let's say his stats are correct. I have a very different takeaway from this than he does. He's saying women are too picky, poor men, women's standards are just too high. Whereas I see this as men and women having very different approaches to dating. Because I hear this and I'm like, well, why are you even swiping on 1,000 people in the first place? How are there 1,000 people in this world that you like enough to say, yes, I would like to date you. I see a future with you. Maybe if these men were actually pickier about who they were swiping yes on, then they wouldn't have such a low success rate, because they'd actually be swiping on people who they actually have a chance with and a connection with and share values with. He thinks this is a problem with women being too picky. I think this is a problem with men not being picky enough and not seeing women, especially on dating apps, as real humans. They're not actually looking for a partner or a connection. They're just trying to grab anything they can, latch onto the first thing that'll say, yeah, go on then. Men treat dating apps, according to this guy, like they're in the dome on Crystal Maze, flailing around trying to grab onto whatever they can. Since I've been single this last year and a bit, I admit I've tried a dating app and I've been on quite a few dates. And like I said earlier, I've got a lot of people liking me on that app, like nearly 10,000 likes. And in return, I think I've sent maybe 20 likes in the last year and got 15 matches? And I have been out on some lovely dates and met some lovely people, and one not so lovely person who I walked out on. But that's the thing. Am I sending so few likes because my standards are too high? Or, and I should just give more men a chance and boo-hoo-hoo, think about the men I'm not going on dates with. And, think about the well-being of those poor men that I'm not interested in. Or is it because I actually know what I want and I'm not going to waste mine or anyone else's time matching with someone, sending likes to someone, going on dates with someone that I know I have no future with? One of the biggest things that I found is that because I am a child-free woman who I don't want kids, I am very likely unable to have kids, and also I don't want to be like a step-parent to anyone or anything like that. I don't want kids in my life, right? And so anyone who has kids or wants kids is an immediate no from me, because I know there's no future there, that is not going to work out, that is not the lifestyle I want, that is not someone that I'm going to have a real connection with. My profile specifically says all of this stuff. I say that I want someone else who is child-free by choice too. I can make it very, very clear. And yet, the amount of men I still get with children or who want children who send me likes is ridiculous. These are thousands of men who are liking me that I'm like, I already told you I'm not interested. Why are you trying anyway? And it's because they don't bother to read my profile or view me as a real person or respect my values and boundaries already. So these men are sending likes to people who they've already been told they're not compatible with, and yet they do it anyway and complain that they're not getting liked back. I think the reason a lot of these men who swipe 1,000 times and only get one date aren't having the success that they want is because they're not being picky enough. They're not being specific enough. They don't even know what they want themselves. They're just trying to grab anything they can. And honestly, it's a bit dehumanizing to the women they're liking. Not liking, but just sending likes to, I'm going to give you one more example of this before I move on. And this isn't even on a dating app. This is in real life.
This man went to a party, asked out every single woman there, and then made a Reddit post wondering why he wasn't able to get a date. He says in the post that they were able to see him approaching other women. He was getting tired and he was getting demoralized with rejection after rejection, and still he asked out every single woman. Because he's like, oh, if I ask everyone, like it's a numbers game, I'll get a yes at some point. This post is on the Ask Men Advice subreddit, which is a horrible, toxic, misogynistic subreddit. Don't go on there. Like, that's what this guy was doing. He was treating them like a number. Like, oh, I have to ask out every single one. And he's not actually just like expressing interest or getting to know them or having any sort of human connection at all. But the post is titled, Why Exactly Is It Bad for a Man to Be Desperate? And other commenters pointed out that it's not just a man being desperate. It's bad in dating to be desperate at all. It's bad in life to be desperate.
This man has gone round to these actual women in real life, treating them like they're objects, being like, I'll try this one, then this one, then this one, then this one. He's not actually bothering to get to know these women. He's not looking for a real genuine connection. He's not looking for an authentic connection. He's not going out there thinking, hey, how do I find the person who is right for me, who shares my values and goals, who shares my interests, who I have mutual respect with? He's just thinking, I want a girlfriend and any'll do, which one will give me a yes first. And it's dehumanizing to the women. I'll keep saying that. It's objectifying these women, and yet these men wonder why they can't get girlfriends. And it's because they're not viewing women as human. They're viewing them as like an object to collect, It's funny, I've seen a lot of men online judging women for things like, the little like blind box toys and stuff like that. Sorry, my washing machine's going. But you know, like little blind box toys, like the Labubu's and those like terrifying little crying baby things, and I don't even know what else. And I keep seeing a woman on Instagram for some reason who collects like dumpling squishies or something like. Anyway, not the point. These women will literally grab every box they can because they're looking for a specific one, and they blindly open them and rip them open. They're like, oh, okay, this isn't the one I want, never mind. And then they go to another and another. And you see men criticizing that because it's like, ooh, it's so stupid. Why are they doing this? I'm like, you're just doing that in real life with women. You're treating women like Labubus, you know, looking for your secret Labubu, and yet you're doing it with real people, you know? You're just trying everything blindly, ripping open these boxes blindly, looking for this special. I don't know if this analogy's going anywhere. This wasn't in the script. And I should say, I have no problem with people collecting things. I'm a collector myself. I like my things. I like my house to represent me. I do have slight issues with like the blind boxes because of the gambling aspect and the overconsumption aspect. But that aside, men criticize women for doing that because they get joy out of like a stuffed toy or whatever. And yet they're doing it with real people. It's exactly the same thing. Anyway, sorry, rant over. Let's move on. Right, I was talking about books, wasn't I? And the ones written by men. And admittedly, though, I have to say, like, for all I have given criticisms, these books are not all bad. And there are some good bits of advice in them. And I do have to give them credit because at least they're being proactive, which is more than I can say for some of the men I've seen online creating videos. Actually, not just men, all kinds of people. Let's look at a few examples, and we're going back to Shoe on Head. If you can't tell, I'm not a fan of her.
Men struggling don't want to be lectured about the patriarchy. They don't want to be told it's all their fault. They don't want to be told they're part of the problem because, first of all, they're not. The average 20-year-old didn't build society. They go to work, come home, off to sissy hypno fetish porn, and go to bed like everyone else. I've talked about this before, but a lot of men's value comes from the money they make, unfortunately. Men are natural providers, and if they have nobody to provide for, they get into findom or send random girls on the internet money. I'm just kidding, but the fact is, a lot of men simply feel like they don't have a purpose anymore. Whether a job or a career that's fulfilling and pays well, or a woman or family to protect and take care of and provide for, men are lacking purpose. And a man will crawl through broken glass for a purpose.
June, Shoe on Head, wants to bury her head in the sand and pretend that issues with toxic masculinity, misogyny, and patriarchy don't exist and aren't really issues, and we shouldn't point them out because men don't want to hear that. So basically her answer is just pretend that toxic stereotypes about men and toxic masculinity don't exist. Just pretend they're not there. The solution is, in her mind, to embrace those harmful stereotypes and tell every man he needs to be a big, strong provider and he'll stop being lonely if he just works a little harder. Which is probably the most harmful thing you can do. Again, nearly 5 million views, and she's giving advice which is literally going to cause more harm. This is why I have a problem with her. Like, this just won't work. Sure, a lot of people need a sense of purpose in their life, but telling men that their one and only purpose is and can only be that they need to provide, and that they just need to do... And that they just need to man up and get on with it and do that because that's just how men have always been. But at the same time, she's like, oh, we need to coddle them and be like, poor ickle babies, nothing is ever your fault. It's just wild, and none of this is helpful. It's one of the worst takes on male loneliness that I've seen. Now, I'm not saying we need to be like, men, you ruin everything, damn you all, like she would probably try and suggest I'm saying. That's not what I'm saying at all. What I am saying, and what I have been saying throughout this video, is that we need to be like, hey, you know what, we need to recognize there are some massive problems here in how we socialize men, in how we raise men, in the stereotypes we place around men, on the expectations we place on men, and we need to be realistic about the fact that these are a problem, and it's likely if you're feeling lonely, if you're having X, Y, and Z problems, then you probably internalize some of that, internalize some of these really harmful ideas. Because, you know, patriarchy, misogyny, capitalism, bad stuff, and so on. And since you're feeling so lonely and this is clearly having an effect on you and this is having consequences, why not unpack those a little and reevaluate your beliefs and realize that you don't need to have these harmful traits to be a real man. You are enough as you are. You are already a real man. It's okay to just be you and figure out that stuff for yourself and work on building genuine connections with real people. That's what I'm saying, not man up and find a purpose. Masculinity can never be toxic. News, how men have always been. That's what I find unhelpful. Here's another example of bad advice that I found online. So I think I showed a clip from this earlier, but this is the man who complains about being lonely and says that he needs a girlfriend to cure his loneliness, but then he goes on about why he can never get a girlfriend and he's not actually ready for a girlfriend, and it's very sad to watch. And our little self-help guru guy in the corner responds like this and tries to give him some advice.
I've been feeling rather upset lately about my not being in a relationship. I'll go to like family parties and basically my entire family's either engaged or getting married now. I see people having children. I see people making a lot more money than me and having much more success. And it's not like I need that necessarily, but I would like to have something going for my life. And I keep trying to do my own thing, but the fact that I can't keep a consistent source of social relationships going, and I did have that for a while, but then, one person will get into a relationship, so I won't see them anymore. Another couple people move away, and pretty soon my whole fucking group of friends that I can talk to on a regular basis is just fucking gone. So it's been making me need a relationship more and more.
Just admitted that he's had a lot of women that were attracted to him. He's not an ugly dude. I mean, he's a haircut away, eating clean, shaving that weird mustache thing he's got going on. He's a few small changes away from making a drastic improvement, like literally day 2 in his appearance. And then he is like 6 months out, a year out of just clean eating, working out, running, for his skin and his hair to all look nice, for him to be carrying himself with more confidence and to look physically better. I mean, he's already capable of pulling girls in the state that he's in right now. That should tell you something.
So this guy is saying, I have trouble maintaining social relationships. Literally a quote from him. And little self-help guy's answer is, just shave your mustache, bro. You can't make this stuff up, can you? His advice is also surface level and doesn't actually address any of the root problems. Loneliness cannot be fixed with a haircut, and I can't believe I even have to say that. You aren't going to get a nice haircut and then suddenly people will be flocking to be around you. You don't shave your mustache and suddenly know how to open up to your friends. These are problems that you need to address on a deeper level. Understand the cause for them and then how to fix that, and then you can work on a natural solution. You need to start actively reaching out to people and working on friendships. He says he had friends, but then they got into relationships and, then they drifted away and now he's like, boo-hoo, I have no friends. It's like, okay, so yeah, they're in a relationship and they're probably a bit distracted. So now you as the single person need to be a little bit more proactive in maintaining that friendship, reach out to them, say, hey, I know you're busy, you've got a new girlfriend, boyfriend, partner, whatever, but I miss you and I value your friendship and I'd love to hang out sometime. Be proactive in your approach. Or if you want to meet new friends and meet new people, start going to new clubs, or not nightclubs, like sports clubs, craft clubs, art clubs, board game clubs, and go to social events, pick up a new hobby where you can meet people and forge new friendships. If you want a relationship, start actively dating people and looking for people who share your values and work on building a deep connection with someone. These are difficult things to do that take time and effort, but that's how you maintain real friendships. They don't just come to you, they don't just fall in your lap. I think a lot of people think that the hard part is finding a friend or finding a partner, and then once you have them, that's it, you just coast along and everything's good. But it's not. Any kind of relationship takes constant work and effort from both sides. Of saying, I want to spend time with you, I want to be around you, I appreciate your company, let's do this together, let's build our relationship even more, let's find ways to become closer and more intimate with each other. These are things that take time and effort, like I say. And telling someone that all they need to do is just shave their mustache or go for a run, bro, and it'll fix everything, is not only completely wrong, but unhelpful. As I think we've all come to expect at this point as well, Matt Walsh also has some terrible advice, which is just be a man, be more manly, go fishing and don't talk to anyone. Yeah, that's what real men do. Again, I'm laughing at this because it's so stupid, but it's genuinely harmful advice.
Now, these experts are correct that men need fellowship, and men are missing it these days, and that is part of the problem, definitely. But they even miss the point on that end too. Even when they're right, they end up being wrong because they encourage men to fellowship in the way that women fellowship. You know, they tell men to sit around and talk about their feelings, do some yoga, listen to soft music, hold each other and cry. That's not the kind of fellowship men need or want. Okay, we can't expect corporate media's masculinity experts to understand this because their masculinity experts are all effeminate. But any normal man can attest that men tend to bond while engaging in a shared activity. And I don't mean yoga, okay? I mean like one that doesn't require a lot of talking, like sitting and watching the game or fishing or golfing, playing pickup basketball and so on. I went out fishing with my brother-in-law a few weeks ago, and when we came back, my wife asked me what we talked about, and I said, I don't know, nothing really. You didn't talk about anything? You didn't talk about it? Well, we talked about fishing. You went fishing and you just talked about fishing? What's going on in his life? What's going on? What did you talk about? We didn't talk about much. For all the talk of patriarchy, we do not live in a patriarchy. Ultimately, we live in a matriarchal society with institutions either run by women or by effeminate men who, in their arrogance, simply cannot accept the fact that men are different from women and have different needs and desires. So this is the real problem. It's not that men are too focused on masculinity, it's that masculinity has been neutered, castrated, driven out of society, leaving men feeling lost and without purpose. Our notions of masculinity aren't too traditional. On the contrary, they aren't nearly traditional enough. The solution isn't that we sit around and talk about our feelings. It's that we do a whole lot less of that sort of thing and get back to being men again.
Oh god, I could literally make an hour-long video just unpacking how messed up all the things he said in that small segment were, but let's try and make it as quick as possible because this video is already very long. I've spent like 3 and a bit weeks on this video at this point, and I'm exhausted by it. If I ever have to use the phrase male loneliness again, I may cry. After I've done this script, I've got enough energy to power through for now. So, I think everything I've shown in the video so far proves that this advice from Matt Walsh will not work. Simple as that. Men are not happier when they're silent and alone. All the stats show it. And I found it really interesting that he made this big claim that for all men, talking about your feelings is not the kind of fellowship men need or want. Because again, the reality shows this is just not true. There's so many men out there talking about how this is exactly what they do want, and how when they found this is how they started to combat loneliness and have better mental health and be in a better place in life. There are so many men out there who are craving this kind of connection, and there's actually a lot that are doing something about it, and I think it's brilliant. So Max Dickens explored a lot of these options in his book, Billy No Mates, and it was genuinely really lovely to read about. So one of the biggest things he advocates for are men's groups. He visited a London-based one called Men Speak, but I personally know some people who have been to places like Andy's Man Club up north here, and they absolutely love it, and they get that same level of connection. There's lots of options out there. I'm sure some are better for others, like if you want to try them, maybe just have a look around what's in your area, what is the best fit for you, but there's a lot of options, you know? Max writes of Men Speak that it is a strictly no banter zone, and that everything shared is completely confidential, and it focuses on giving men a space to sit and chat and think and share their problems with each other. It is about support, not competition or judgment. It is about openness and connection, not just sitting silently next to each other. These men don't allow each other to put up some fake macho front. They want to see each other's real selves and accept each other for who they really are. And again, I think that's damn beautiful. Max himself wrote of his experience, "The first thing I noticed is how weird it feels to not be allowed to banter in a group of men. Every cell in my body is screaming at me to make a joke. It feels genuinely exposing. I have no choice but to communicate in a different way. It's no surprise to see the conversation turns deep very quickly. Everyone here is so unguarded that I don't want to let them down." He says that, "I enjoy men's groups because there's a lot of flexibility, a lot of experimentation, and a lot of acceptance for people as and how they come." And these are the words from the mouth of a man. Like, this is not just me projecting, like, my ideas onto men or being like, ooh, as a woman, this is men saying this. I am only repeating back the words of men. So clearly there is a desire and a need for this kind of connection. As I'll keep saying, this isn't something women are forcing on men. this is something that men are saying, I need and want to do this. And it's those kinds of actions that will combat loneliness, not go fishing and shut up. We need to stop with this idea that communication, empathy, emotional connection, and so on are feminine traits, and that somehow makes them less valuable, because they're not. That's just rooted in misogyny, and it does nothing but harm absolutely everyone. Matt also explored other solutions in his book too, and I do think if there's any men watching this video who are genuinely feeling lonely, I would recommend it. It's called Billy No Mates, and it's by Max Dickens, and it is probably the main book I would recommend to men watching this video, because it shows Max kind of realizing, oh crap, like I've internalized a lot of these harmful ideas, here's how it's affecting me, this is what I did about it, this is how I'm kind of out the other side doing a lot better and continuing to be proactive in maintaining and deepening my friendships in my life, and I think that's kind of beautiful. So he also went to a group by the Men's Sheds Association, which is basically about getting a bunch of men together to do something, you know, work on an allotment, do a DIY project, do some car mechanical work or whatever. And while they're there, working side by side on a shared project, they chat and they open up. And it's easier for them to be doing this side by side than face to face. It's kind of like what Matt Walsh said about men, you know, enjoying shared activities together. I think that's a great thing. But when Matt is like, you sit down and shut up and do it, this is like, oh no, we use this as an excuse to like get together and talk and open up and create this safe environment where we can all connect with each other, you know? Max did other things too, like setting up a little local football meetup with his friends. He made active attempts to reach out to people in his life, and he started to actively tell the people that he cared about that he actually cared about them, and he vocalized it, and it worked. It deepened his friendships. He felt less lonely. He forged real, deep, authentic connections. And I actually really enjoyed reading this in particular, because this act of making sure you tell your friends you care about them is something that I have been actively choosing to do over the last few years, and I've seen it as nothing but a positive thing in my life. I absolutely tell my friends that I love them regularly. I tell them when I've really enjoyed doing something with them. I'll say things like, hey, thank you for inviting me to X event. I really enjoyed it. I'd love to do this again. And it's interesting because in me taking that first step and opening up in that way to so many people, it's allowed other people to open up too. And now, like, you know, I've got a lot of friends at my writing group that I go to, and I think all of us are like very vocal with like, oh, I love you lots, this is great, you know, I've really enjoyed seeing you. And everyone is way more open and affectionate with each other than I think I've ever had in a friend group before, and it's really damn beautiful, and it does, I think, make us all feel a lot more close and connected, and it's really nice. It's interesting though, so a 2023 study titled The State of American Men found that in the past week, 49% of women interviewed had told a friend they loved them, but it was only 25% of men. And again, I have to ask to anyone who's watching this who's maybe feeling lonely, when's the last time you opened up to a friend like that on that deeper level and were a little bit vulnerable and a little bit open and honest? When's, I don't know, the last time you picked up a little gift for a friend just because you saw it and thought of them? When's the last time you picked up a little snack for someone because you know it's their favourite? The last time you, I don't know, picked up toiletries for someone unprompted because you noticed they were running out before they did? When's the last time you put together a little care package for a friend who was ill and couldn't leave the house? When's the last time you made a mistake and maybe overstepped someone's boundaries, and instead of immediately saying, yeah, but, you said, oh God, that's my mistake, I'm so sorry, how can I make you more comfortable? When's the last time you said to a friend, I miss you, I appreciate your friendship, I know how much you mean to me, hey, I really enjoyed doing X, Y, and Z with you? When's the last time you told someone in a completely platonic way that you loved them? I thoroughly believe it's these little acts of kindness and friendship and honest vulnerability and mutual respect that keep people close and prevent loneliness. If you want to feel less lonely, you have to actually make a step forward to connect with people. And you need to do that because you want to be there for them, not because you're expecting something in return. Okay, let's move on to the very last part of this video, part 5, relationships with women. We have spoken a lot so far about friendships and forging deep connections, but what about romantic relationships? Because of course they do play into this too. I feel like this is a really complicated issue to talk about because romantic relationships are important to a lot of people, and focusing on having a strong, healthy relationship will help if you're feeling lonely. However, I've seen a lot of men blaming women for the loneliness of men, because if they can't find a partner, that's the women's fault for being too picky and not picking them. And if they do have a partner, then they often feel like their partner needs to fulfill their every social need, and that puts a hell of a lot of pressure on one person. I feel like one of the biggest differences that I've seen while researching for this video is that in general, women are more likely to build communities around them, whereas men seem to rely on one woman for everything in their life. They want the maid, mother and whore all rolled into one, basically. So when they can't find a partner that's every single thing they want and able to fulfill every single one of those social needs, they feel incredibly lonely because they don't have another community to fall back on. And of course, no one person can do all that, so of course they're going to feel lonely. However, with many women, it's clear that if they don't have a partner or a partner who doesn't fulfill every single need, that's fine because they've got their other friends, they've got family, they've got co-workers, they've got people in their community that they can turn to and fall back on. And I do think this is why we see a lot of men getting so angry towards women when they're lonely, and they blame women and feminism for their loneliness. And I think the important thing to remember here is that these men do deserve community and friendship and emotional support from other humans. They just have to realize that they don't deserve to have it all from one woman. If they want friendship and emotional support in their life, they need to find it for themselves in a community of friends and family, and they also need to give it back to other people as well. Relationships aren't just about demanding emotional support from other people, but being able to give it to them as well. Let's take a look at a few examples. Here's a video clip.
There is also a huge male loneliness epidemic. It's actually really,
yeah,
really
that's because women are unmarriable. That's why there's a loneliness epidemic.
Sense, yeah. Male are lonely because women are unmarriable. Yes, that makes total sense.
A lot of the responsibility lies on feminists for the current state of affairs, which is happening in the West. Abortion is a great example, which is demanded by women so that they can be sexually promiscuous absent the consequence.
And as another example, let's look at this Reddit post I found. I found so many Reddit posts like this, but I just picked one because otherwise we'd be here all day reading them all. This person says, women are responsible for male loneliness. Women are ultimately responsible for men's loneliness. This is the elephant in the room, in my opinion, that needs to be discussed. I think we need to discuss your lack of comments, but never mind. When a man is lonely or expresses his frustration towards dating, he is often given advice to self-improve, or that he isn't owed sex, or to just get a dog, and so on. It seems that the common response is that it's a man's fault if he's lonely. That this is something he has total control over and agency, that being lonely is simply a byproduct of a man's own actions and lifestyle. Yet the studies show that women only swipe on a very small percentage of men on dating apps. There are tons of posts on Reddit where women say they find most men unattractive. Multiple studies demonstrate that women generally find the same traits attractive, such as height, a masculine face, wealth, and so on. Many of the traits women find attractive in men are inherent and cannot be easily attained to change. That odd writing. Also, I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt here again. This idea that that's all women look for is so damn delusional. I don't think, out of all the people, well, I've never dated someone wealthy, I don't think. I've also never understood the height thing, because I'm quite an average height. I'm 5'6", so nearly everyone in the world is the same height as me or taller. So it doesn't really matter, you know? I've dated men who are 5'5", 5'6", 5'7", 5'8", and who are like 6'5". Neither is more attractive than the other based on height. I just think it shows how disconnected a lot of these men are from the realities of the world and like what people are actually looking for. I think if you ask most women who are attracted to men what they look for in a man, one of the first traits is going to be kindness, you know, and then maybe like the ability to make you laugh, and then maybe like, you know, attractive face or whatever. But anyway, the complaining man goes on to say this isn't a woe is me post or anything. But the reality is women are the ones causing male loneliness. We know that women are very picky when it comes to dating, and we also know that women find certain traits in men attractive. So when a man is lonely, is it really his fault? If he isn't getting chosen by women, is it truly his own fault? It's clear that in most cases, it's actually not his fault. It's a combination of modern dating dynamics and women's pickiness. And again, as we've said in like a couple of parts of this video, I think it's true that women are generally pickier than men, but that's only a good thing. I think men could stand to be a little pickier as well. And I don't mean picky in the sense of like, oh, I need someone who's a 10 out of 10 nooks and like, don't be so shallow. Be picky in the sense of like, oh, this is something I really value in my life. This is a goal I have in my life. This is an interest that I have. It would be really nice if I had a partner who shared this value, who had a similar goal, whose life was going in the same direction as me, who had the same means as me, for example. Like, I think they're the things that you really need to figure out for yourself, and then be picky about when it comes to dating. It's as simple as that. So I admit, there are perhaps some men who are feeling lonelier than ever because more women are choosing to be single rather than be in a bad relationship. I mean, look, we already mentioned a few books about it, about like the joy of being single, essentially. Well, actually, that's the first book. The Unexpected Joy of Being Single by Catherine Gray, The Art of Living Alone and Loving It by Jane Matthews, How to Be Alone by Lane Moore, How to Be Single and Happy by Jennifer Oates, Alonement, How to Be Alone and Absolutely Own It by Francesca Spector, and so on and so on. These are all women who, like myself, are quite content being single. And I mean, I am looking for a relationship. I would like to find my forever person. But I don't need just anyone. I'm not going to cling on to the first person who shows interest in me if they're not right for me. It's better to be alone than with the wrong person. I've always said this. I think perhaps instead of telling women they need to lower their standards, men also need to get better at being alone in the first place. Men need to raise their standards, and men need to be happier with who they are. Men need to foster another community around them that isn't just a relationship, you know? The other side of this is seen with clips like this.
I've been single for 10 years. It's not a long shot. Somebody just needs to grow a pair and step up. I am shockingly available.
So this old clip from 2019 of Charlize Theron talking about being single and shockingly available is doing the rounds again. And since all you ever hear about is the male loneliness epidemic, men are of course pouring into the comments to relate to and empathize with her situation. No, just kidding. They're tearing her apart. She just told us she's the red flag, y'all. 10 years, she's the problem. Not if you paid me. It's you. Translation, I can't keep a man. If she's been single for 10 years, it's because she wants to be single. A powerful woman who's used to getting everything she wants and calling all the shots. A man has to enter her life and submit to it. And I cannot even imagine the ways she will test him. If a woman is single, then she's to blame. She's too picky, she's too demanding, she has too many red flags. She is the problem. And yet, whenever the conversation inevitably turns to that epidemic of so-called male loneliness, that call for introspection and self-awareness suddenly completely evaporates, as that too is also women's burden to bear. Because we operate from a foundation that there's never any valid reason to disqualify a man. And then using that to justify the idea that the #1 enemy preventing men's happiness and self-fulfillment are women who don't just settle for the man in front of them. When we should be teaching men that rather than being upset and angry at women for decentering men should instead be inspired by and emulate them. Decentering women, or at the very least decentering the need for a romantic partner and finding other outlets for emotional support. Building deep connections with family and friends by engaging in meaningful conversations.
So when a man is single, it's the woman's fault. If a woman is single, it's also her fault. That is the recurring theme throughout this video. Just blame women. The other thing perhaps is, instead of blaming women for choosing to be single and getting mad at them for it and saying their standards are too high, maybe we could look at why so many women are choosing to be single and look at the actual cause of that, which is that often men's behaviour is terrible. So is it because their standard is too high, or is it because they've been mistreated by men and don't want to put up with that anymore? Look at this selection of clips I found online. These are men who are actually in relationships and yet still treat their partners with disrespect, overstep their boundaries, and don't show any care for them. There's also a clip at the end of men on a podcast laughing about like quotes and tweets and posts from men who actively hate their girlfriends, and they're laughing like this is the funniest thing in the world.
Only 2 things are required to keep me happy: keep my belly full and my balls empty. So you're amazing at half of it. We really need to get you some cooking lessons. Even when my belly isn't full, there is no one I could ever love more in this lifetime, unless I actually get a chance to meet Margot Robbie. Y'all make life worth living, giving every breath of every day a purpose. Life gets even better when the kids fall asleep and you tell me to come to the bedroom. Nothing's better than the sound of gagging and headboard slamming.
Michael.
Everyone keeps telling me that marriage is going to ruin a lot of things, but I feel that's only if you let it. P.S. Since you're so good at making decisions like marrying me, you can choose whether tonight's going to end with being a toaster, strudel, or a Twinkie.
Anything you want to say to your future bride?
I hope we have a lot of sex. A lot.
Don't. No. No. We talked about this for real. Please don't do it.
I'm not gonna
Okay.
do it.
2, 1, let's go. Yeah. Oh my. Dude. She literally just told you. I asked you for one thing. All of my friends are here and they're filming us. And
It's like what we did on the wedding night.
one thing. I was mad then too. But it's not funny.
I promise to smack that ass every chance I get. That's all I got.
So I forgot my lunch today, and I asked my husband to bring me lunch. So let's do an unboxing, because clearly it's a little full. We have a bag of we have a bag of cookies. Not a Ziploc bag, but a bag. We have a bag of pretzels. Feels very empty. We got an apple. Gotta stay healthy. This is good. We have not just a portion of Pringles, but an entire container of Pringles. Another bag of cookies. Another bag. Options. Lucky me. And lastly, oh. Okay, we have my 2-day-old Chipotle. And at the very bottom, we have a bag of dog food. Because you're my dog. There's 2, Joy. Please bring back the dogs are low on food. So ladies, if you don't have food, and your husband has to bring you a lunch, just know that you're gonna get lots of food, as well as maybe even a cute note.
That phase where you slowly start hating your girlfriend is crazy.
I remember this one time on a weekend she said she was coming. Yo, I cried.
Yeah.
You start asking yourself things like, does she have to chew when she eats?
Yeah. The infuriation.
When she holds your hand in public and you feel like cutting it off.
Yeah. That made me snort. Oh my God. And the problem asks you what the problem is. Her hug feels like you're getting mugged.
Yo. No. When her smile takes away yours.
Nah. When she says, I'll call you when I get home, then you switch off your phone and remove the battery.
He doesn't want to communicate with anyone.
There's no chance you're getting through to me.
You'll be wondering why your day is going so well. Her battery died.
When you decide to unlock your phone so she could check anytime.
The man making sexual remarks over and over in his wedding vows, and his wife who smiled along even though she was uncomfortable as hell, clearly. The woman who didn't get a proper lunch and instead got leftovers, improperly packaged snacks, and joke dog food, and she still defends his behaviour as, oh man, it's not so bad because at least he brought me something. Like, I just think if women in relationships with men or any partner who treats them this way, like, if you're one of these people in a relationship with someone like this, it is absolutely okay to say, I deserve better. I deserve a basic level of respect and care from the people in my life. I deserve to have my boundaries, privacy, and health respected. I don't think that's too much to ask for. I don't think that's women causing men's loneliness. I think that's women having a basic level of self-respect that men don't offer to them. And it's absolutely no surprise that some men feel they can act like this, since this is the nonsense being spread around online. Idiots like Andrew Wilson seem to believe that women like horrible behaviour, and it's just absolute nonsense.
I do think that most men are toxic, and I do think that they fit the criteria and modernity of what abuse is. And I think that women love that shit. So, like, here, hang on, hear me out, okay? The things that women consider to be toxic traits, which is, it's usually too much of the thing that they like, too much assertion, too much dominance, too much of this, too much of that, right?
It's on a scale.
But then, if the man backs it off, even an inch,
then it's too little.
Yeah. Right? So it's like, so all of these things which are considered toxic masculinity, right? All those toxically masculine men, they seem to be getting plenty of women. They don't seem to have much problem with that at all. When you say abuse, especially verbal abuse, right? This is the idea of a man basically just saying no, right? That's usually what verbal abuse reduces to it. What I think ultimately is that men who say no and are very toxic in their masculinity basically got nothing to worry about. And he's right? Aren't you training them to be toxically masculine?
Please do not listen to this rubbish, not even for a second. This is not what women like. This is not what women look for. If you want a genuine, deep, authentic connection with someone, this is not the way to go about it. Is it any wonder women are choosing to walk away more often? In her book, For the Love of Men, Liz Plank writes about how she noticed more and more women in her life that she knew were choosing to be single and walk away from relationships that weren't fulfilling them. And she wrote, "Women had always complained about difficulties in their romantic relationships with men, but something felt different. Suddenly, it felt like women were done. They'd put up with men who were emotionally inconsistent and unavailable for too long. Women were fed up and had reached their limit. They were desperate to love men, but according to them, men had become impossible to love." In fact, she quotes her own sister saying, "I just started realizing I have such rich relationships with the women in my life. Why would I lower my standards when it comes to my relationship with men?" She does go on to say there's more to it than this though, and a lot of it comes back to what I said in the beginning of this section. Heterosexual men seem to want their partner to be everything to them, their whole social network, their whole emotional support, a maid, a chef, a mother, their sexual partner, everything, and it's just too much to put on one person. Max Dickens points this out too, and he says some people argue that men's isolation creates even more emotional labour for women because they have to act as borderline live-in therapists for their boyfriends and husbands. The men they're with simply have no other people in their lives to meet their emotional needs. One person cannot be everything to their partner, and asking them to do so is too much. For all I critiqued a couple of aspects of his book earlier, Bill Howard was completely right when he said no one relationship can meet 100% of your needs. And so the solution for this for men is do the emotional labour yourself. Work on yourself. Don't rely on a partner for everything. Expand your circle of friends so you have a community around you. And raise your standards. And before you do that, figure out yourself what you need from a relationship and what you can give to a relationship. Do the emotional labour. Okay, that's it. We are just about done. In conclusion, loneliness is something that affects all kinds of people. We've established this. But male loneliness is one of the most dangerous types of loneliness for society today because it doesn't just harm the men themselves, but it ripples out, fueling radicalization, violence, especially against women, and basically deepens divides across society. It's the result of poor socialization, of toxic masculine ideas that strip boys of their emotional openness and teach men that vulnerability is weakness. But it is solvable. This isn't an impossible problem. We know that boys start their life with the same desire for connection and intimacy as girls do. We know that when men are given permission to be vulnerable, to connect, to express their feelings, that their health improves, their relationships deepen, their lives are happier, they're healthier, and they live longer. And we know that dismantling these harmful gender roles doesn't just free women, it frees men too. Women face less violence, men commit less violence. Women have better partners, men finally get partners, and so on, you know? And that's why this matters. This isn't a video about criticizing men, but about helping them. It's about creating a world where men aren't pushed into isolation or mocked for seeking help or end up in these radical incel echo chambers in the manosphere that only deepen their pain. if we talk about these issues and really get to the root cause of them and understand them and get men to start working on this stuff themselves, they can help themselves. And that's what this video is about. I was going to end this video by talking about some of the comments that you guys left on the community tab post that I asked you about, but I do think this video is long enough. So if you want to see that, I'll probably record me just reading and responding to some of the comments. Well, actually, I'm thinking either I'll do it as a live stream or I'll do it as like a shorter little video. I'm not sure. But I'll come back to that soon. After I'm working on this video, I've got another one. I'm doing a book review next, and there's potentially another sort of book review video I'm doing about it's like a fantasy author and the drama around that. Well, it was Audra Winter. I don't know if I'm too late to that now. I've got a half-written script, but I don't know. And then another half-written script about a Frida McFadden book review. I have things to say about that. But after I've done them, I'll hopefully come back and read some of your comments and talk about that on camera. And that'll be a lot more of a relaxed video. But for now, I would like to hear your thoughts on all of this video. And again, I might respond to some of the comments that you leave on there in that future video too. So please let me know your thoughts below. Try and be kind to each other. I trust you guys. You usually are. But yeah, thank you so much for watching today. Thank you for all your time and your effort and your energy in watching such a long and dense video. Like, you have no idea how much I appreciate it, and thank you so much. Thank you for everyone's continued support with my channel, especially to the people who support me over on Patreon or with channel memberships. Thank you to everyone who's ever bought my merch, my books, anything like that. It really does mean so much. And anyway, that is where I'm going to end things today. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you all have an absolutely wonderful rest of your day, and I'll see you again really soon.